Welcome to Volya Radio. Slava Ukraini!
Dobry wieczór, всі і всім, sound check. Oh, here, Robin. Thanks for coming to Book Club and Culture Hour on Volya Radio. It is 4:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. It is 6:59 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'm sure Robin or Will could help me with those other times since I got her rolling. What do you think?
All right, it is, let me see, it is just about midnight London time, 2 a.m. Kyiv, and it is 8 a.m. in the workers' paradise of Perth, Australia. There we go.
There's Will living in the future.
Making it 10 a.m. in Sydney and Japan.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess we've got at least some of it covered.
Well, we got all the co-hosts covered anyway.
How's it going, Robin? We are at the end of our book.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. I think we're gonna get 2 weeks out of this, I somehow suspect, but yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm buried at this point. I've got so much to do. I'm having trouble keeping things straight. I think I have to bleed off a little bit of some of my less important tasks and figure out if I lost my calendar, my life would be totally gone. So anyway, but how are you doing?
I'm very good. It's an interesting geopolitical weekend, to say the least. Hoyla's collection of failed dictators increases by one. I wonder if they're all living in the same high rise. This is what makes me wonder if there's that like neighborhood that they've hit with drones a couple times and they've got a little, those guys don't get an estate or a house. They just get a floor on a shitty Stalinist apartment block in the right neighborhood, maybe. Maybe that's what I hope.
I was dreaming that Yanukovych and Assad were going to be roommates. Actually, did you see that? I think it was Roger Stone, one of those idiots, had posted this thing comparing Assad and Zelensky. And making a big thing about the fact that Assad wore a nice suit. Well, he can wear his nice suit sitting in his crappy Soviet era apartment in Moscow.
Steady on Rostov.
Oh,
Prices are too high in Moscow.
Rostov.
They're putting them all in Rostov these days.
Oh, I love it. That's within drone range too. I like it.
Ukrainian forces had a failed drone strike on the failed dictator high-rise in Rostov-on-Don, and they missed it by a floor, and they by mistakenly killed Assad instead of Yanukovych.
Yeah, right, exactly. Better luck next time.
Yeah, it is pretty hilarious though, and very telling that how petty Roger Stone is. I encourage everybody to go look at Ming's post about Roger Stone's deposition, where his head nearly comes off being forced to answer questions, and he's just seething. And so this is how these maggots' lives run, right? They sit and seethe on the toilet at 3 a.m. over slights and things that are made on them, which is possibly one of the big overreaches that Putin's made, trying to set up negotiations with Trump by insulting him and downplaying him and printing or publishing these porn sort of just the model shots that she made of herself, his wife, all of that stuff, all those jibes to run him down. They never say a word, but that Trump is sitting on the bog at 2 a.m. reading that stuff and getting pissed off, and that's why probably he let them dress him in a dark blue suit and a gold and a yellow tie to go meet Zelensky, and he's probably going to, well, he hasn't said anything about the $988 million donation. He's letting the Biden administration work themselves out of out of their term and not commenting on that stuff anymore, and is commenting on now on how weak Putin is and how silly he looks. So they're both jockeying for position in who's going to be the biggest of the little dictators, and it's just fun to watch. It's always fun to watch Roger Stone getting upset.
Well, and it is. I think you're absolutely right about this too. I think that Putin is totally tone deaf about how to handle Trump, whereas Zelensky has got his number, and I think is handling virtuosity. As is Macron. I think that they know he's a narcissistic, venal kind of guy. And you stroke his ego and make talk about how great he is, and you've got Putin thinking that he can do what has not worked on so many other people and countries of insulting and demeaning his adversary into going along with him. And it doesn't, it's been a bad week for Putin, or Sauron, as I should call him. It's been a very bad week for him. It's I hope I'm wishing him many more in the spirit of the season, many more.
In the spirit of the season. How about the jail releases in Syria? I'm sure Lexicon has some stuff I think she wanted to say, but all of this stuff is, I can't even sit down or sleep this weekend. Go ahead, Lexicon.
No, I'm with you on the jail releases. Did you see the photograph of this? They found this guy in some underground, some hole, and his face is like, I don't know how long he's been there. There's people they found that were put away at the age of 27, 40 years ago. People there's an American guy whose family hasn't known for 12 years if he's alive or dead. And the last I saw, they think there are hints of good news. That was like yesterday. I would think it would be all over American media if it really is for sure. But did you see that picture? This man, I just such a horror. This was a great trick of a lot of actors in Afghanistan. They were doing kidnapping for hire and for profit and so on, and putting people into holes underground. And I mean, since I heard some of those tales years ago, I could hardly imagine a greater horror. And to see this, if you had any question about Assad and like, will there be something worse coming along? I mean, knock on wood, but honest to goodness, I just want to say I'm really glad he's gone to Moscow now. He may not have a permanent suite down there in Rostov or whatever, because it could be embarrassing, but who's ever embarrassed there in Muscovy? But I was just really worried about Putin trying to do some kind of deal, because losing that base, I mean, that is just like nowhere in the world outside Russia. Does Russia have a port that is capable of repair and so on, of maintenance of battleships? And they don't have it. And Chuck's been on some shows. I don't know who I saw him talking to, but he sort of explains for your non-Navy knowledgeable person what it means to not have your port. I mean, these ports, even the airport, like how do you get, well, there are some pipelines, right? How do you get your boats, your ships fueled and stocked and all your hungry sailors fed? And you just go on and on. He can rattle them off. Anyway, I was just, when you started to see Lavrov do his about face and pretend to be talking about his concern for the Syrian people's great future, I was worried, what in the world are they going to try to offer to do a deal with HTS or whatever. But having Assad there at his place, I think it doesn't bode well for doing a good deal on that. So let's hope that Assad makes himself welcome. Anyway, fantastic news, and I loved some of our friends who thanked Ukraine, friends from Syria who said they will never forget the role that Ukraine played in holding these Muscovite bastards down, occupying their attention, their energies, their logistics, their fuel, their everything. And a lot of people, I went on some sites to talk during the past week with people discussing, talking about what was going down. And I tried to raise something about, did they have an idea? Would they like to comment on Ukraine's role in preoccupying Russia? And they didn't see it at all. I mean, nobody, they just had nothing to say. But so that's why it was wonderful to hear from that colleague on the space. But back to you guys. Great days.
Yeah, thank you, Lexicon. Yeah, it is interesting. People who are farther away from all of this don't necessarily see it, but I've certainly seen and heard, a number of Syrians who, in the last few days, have pointed out the role that Ukraine has played in this. And we talked about the former president of Taiwan, who was clearly understood the interconnection between the Ukraine's winning against Russia and Taiwan being safe from China. So the people who are directly impacted by all this do see that linkage that the rest of us, people farther away, don't always get.
Absolutely. Um, where, what part did Israel seize, and how much land, or they have, how much? I've heard just the part of it, if you guys, but I haven't heard the complete story. But apparently, IDF took some territory too. Do we know anything about that?
Seriously googling, I missed that. I would not be surprised. Israel has certainly worked with the White Helmets pretty closely, although unofficially. So, but I'll get back to you. Where's Aria when we need him?
What the heck, Aria? I just put in the nest my response to a Lou Anno thread, and it's an article about our favorite based Budanov, and apparently the GUR has stated that Budanov regularly participates in combat operations. The head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, is not a cabinet general, quote unquote. On the contrary, according to military sources, he quite regularly takes part in combat operations, although he has also regularly refused to do so. This was stated by the GUR spokesman Andriy Yusov in an interview with the Center for Countering Disinformation. He specified that attempts to dissuade Budanov from direct participation in the operation are a headache for everyone. That's so awesome.
This doesn't surprise me in the least. I mean, this seems to be Zelensky is a little bit like that too. I mean, what president shows up on absolutely on the front line time after time after time? This doesn't surprise me in the least with Budanov. It's interesting. I think he's very good as the head of corps, but he doesn't. That's not his. He wants to be out in the field. He's a special operator. Very interesting. Not a surprise. We should pray for his good health, though. We have to keep the man. We have to keep the man alive and doing his job. Tracy.
Hello, Привit. I can tell you that interview is on YouTube, Adam, and I tried to watch it, but there are no captions. It is all in Ukrainian. However, I have the link if you would like it. I'm sure you'll be able to understand it. And yeah, we've heard this reports about Budanov doing this before. And actually, last year, I remember an interview with that. He was talking about some quite serious injuries where he received quite bad injuries, actually, to his neck, to his back, and all sorts of things. So yes, this is definitely true. But of course, we expected no less of somebody so amazing, right?
Yeah, it wasn't he involved, or at least he tried to be involved in the taking of Snake Island a couple of years ago. I seem to remember that he actually took part in part of it. Tracy, yeah.
Yes, indeed, he was involved in that. And there's been quite a few times when he's had to be stopped from being involved in operations as well, Robin. So he wants to get active in more of these things. But like I said, we expect no less of this man, right? He's absolutely incredible.
Indeed, indeed, and he that persona that he puts out, I think, is just wonderful. I know Ukrainians love it, and it must give Russians a little bit of a pause once in a while, especially when they hack into Russian television to show him saying something or other, which I think they've done a couple of times. I would be nervous if I were a Russian looking at Budanov on Russian television, telling them that he has plans. So anyway, Adam, I have furiously Googled, and you are absolutely right. The IDF has taken over the Syrian side of Mount Hermon, the mountain range, to expand its demilitarized zone, buffer zone along the border. They are. This is a high ground over the Golan, which looks down into the Valley of Galilee. That it's so vulnerable. Otherwise, it's why the Golan was such an important area for Israel to hold. And they have said they're not planning on getting involved in any internal things in Syria unless there is a threat. They threaten Israeli security. But last Tuesday, they did strike a chemical weapons factory in order to keep rebels from seizing it. Interesting. I wonder what that was about. But anyway, so that's the story. That it is the Syrian side of the Hermon mountain range they've taken over, just to make sure things don't flow over into Israel. Tracy.
Sorry, going back to Budanov for a moment, I was just going to say that actually he's more popular, and so is Zaluzhny, more popular as far, in my experience anyway, my limited experience in Ukraine, than Zelensky or anybody else is for that matter.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me because among other things, Zaluzhny and Budanov represent all the good things, the winning the war. And I mean, Zelensky, unfortunately for his popularity, he is involved in a lot of day-to-day things, including anti-corruption efforts and decisions about mobilization, whatever. He is not in a popular position. He's less of a figurehead, so it's not surprising. I think Zelensky has a lot of support still, but it is not surprising that it's easier to rally around Budanov or Zaluzhny that way.
And that's okay. That's part of the Maidan mindset, and I'm sure as soon as Budanov or Zaluzhny would enter politics, they would view them with more scrutiny.
Oh, 100%. Yep, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. One thing that when we get to book club, we'll be talking about that tonight. One thing that we know for sure is that Ukrainians have a healthy skepticism about anybody who wants to be your leader. So Zelensky is experiencing some of that. The fact that he is still so popular does speak well for him, because it is a pattern in Ukrainian politics that the presidents become quite unpopular after a certain period of time. Many of them deserved it, but I mean, even for example, Yushchenko, I think, and Poroshenko too, both of them probably deserved a little more popularity than they had in the end, considering what they'd actually done.
Policies, not characters. Yeah. Go ahead, Will.
Just a little quick news update for anybody who's in or concerned about what's going on in the air over Ukraine right now. UAVs are in the air in Chernihiv, heading north-northeast, and there are UAVs in the center of Sumy heading north-northeast, and threat of a ballistic missile attack from the northeast, so from probably the Kursk region. So it's there, and I guess I'm just going to go out on a limb here and guess that Russia is going to do a massive onslaught as a petty, pissed off dictator will do. Expect some very, very bad attacks on Ukraine in the next few days over the loss of Syria.
Yeah, thank you. Will, yeah, he's unfortunately quite predictable that way. It hasn't been quiet in Ukraine most of the day today. There were alerts even in the western part of Ukraine earlier for a few hours, and yeah, this just continues on. Tracy and then Lexicon.
Yeah, there have been alerts going out all day. You're right, Robin. UAVs to Kyiv as well now. And also, I just wanted to mention again that Russia has massively stepped up its attack on civilian cars and also, in particular, on volunteers' cars. Now, of course, we know that this is something that Russia does all the time anyway, so it's not something new, but they have massively stepped that up to terrorize people. And of course, that is to demoralize and divide support for Ukraine as well, and to, as we know, demoralize Ukrainians and divide international support. So, in particular, Kherson, that's happened today, but also there's been various warnings going out to civilians in Ukraine, and also giving a telephone number out so that if people feel like they do want to be evacuated, they know who to contact.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. I mean, this is absolutely horrific. I mean, in the list of Russian war crimes, I assume many of our listeners know this already, but especially in Kherson lately, they're using UAVs just to hunt people like it's some kind of a computer game. They followed civilians. You know, somebody's trying to go out to buy milk or whatever, and they have to be on the alert all the time because as individual civilian who's not carrying a weapon and there's no threat to anything, they're being hunted like animals, and it's absolutely unsurprising considering it's Russians, but this is again something that there should be international outrage at all of this, and I don't. It makes me very cynical sometimes about the world that this can be going on for months and months, as well with the kidnapping of Ukrainian children, thousands and thousands of them, and it doesn't make it to the news anymore even, and it just horrifies me. But anyway, lexicon and then James.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, they're calling it Safari. I don't know when they're going to try and turn it into a video game. I mean, all they wish is that they could all take part. It's really sick. I don't know what I just saw. I was going to note it to talk about. They talked about Russia firing as one of their parting shots. Of course, they hit all kinds of hospitals in Syria and cities. And there was something about a cruise missile that was fired at Syria from 2,000 miles away in the Caspian Sea. And I thought, holy shit, world, even you who posted this, do you happen to know, like, what do you think about 3,000 missiles being fired at somebody in the past couple of years? And have you got the foggiest notion this is going on? Anyway, I've been really keen to talk to people because so what we've looked at in these weeks is with Georgia and Moldova and Syria and all sorts of things going on is how Russia just can't manage all these things, and how I mean I heard a wonderful piece on DW. They were talking with a reporter named Wasim Nasser, who talked about the way that the rebels in Syria acted at just the right moment, and people had been demanding for weeks and months in the northern region that around Aleppo, and people evacuated refugees from Aleppo, demanding action on the part of HTS that they've got to move. And the way the people from the south and Dara and so on, when they saw it was happening, got up and just took over the freeing of Damascus themselves. So all these people, and in Georgia, we're hoping, okay, is Putler too busy to put enough attention into Georgia, and will Georgia manage a soft landing? And the same way Moldova is looking like it dodged a bullet, and et cetera, et cetera.
Georgia.
Romania, y- wasn't I talking about Georgia?
Oh, I missed it.
Anyway, I don't know, but I talked too fast. But anyway, what I want to know is not that Budinov and gang all know, but I wanted a little speculation. What is Ukraine able to do aside from all the things they already do to profit from this distraction? Of course, the reason that Russia's distracted from everybody else is they're focusing all their energies on Ukraine. But as we've been seeing with, for example, the ruble that they're unsuccessfully still trying to prop up, they've actually been buying yuan in order to buy rubles with. But anyway, we can see all this crumbling of their economy, but as we know, you just print money if you're a state. And I wanna I'm trying to understand what impact is this gonna have on the negotiating position that, Trump's gonna be in. I mean, I was saying this afternoon, I think that, like, I saw Mike Johnson saying, "No way we're gonna send any more, we're gonna make any more provisions for sending aid to Ukraine," like, "We got another agenda, there's a new president coming up." But so what's happening is they're gonna create another doldrums, another gap in which when I mean, Ukrainians are, I'm sure, as of now, already husbanding their ammunition because they know it's gonna run out starting January 20th, and there's gonna be this huge gap. What it does to this, I read the April plan by General Kellogg and some sidekick, and I mean, the deal is that one, Ukraine will defend itself and Ukraine will have to accept this freezing on the line. And if not, they won't get anything else. Well, it's a little funny negotiating position to have when you're not sending them anything anyway. And you say, well, if you don't do what we say, we won't send you anything. And Ukraine says, oh, yeah? I mean, it really clearly the man in question is a supposed deal maker and he's not thinking about putting himself in a deal making position. He just does it at the time, I guess. He likes to bargain on the run, I guess. At any rate, it looks to me like America is busily both parties saying we're not going to do anything in Syria. Here is Russia walking out of the most amazing strategic position, but of course, far be it from America to do anything like, well, they are behind the scenes. I'm sure they're making nice to the forces that be in Syria. But at any rate, they're sure looking very hors de combat, completely no shows. And far be it from me to urge a little superpower jockeying here, but they sure ain't jockeying. And I'm just wondering what does it mean for Ukraine's, yes, bargaining position, as I was mentioning, but also the sorts of things that what implications does this have for Russia's, logistics lines and all these things we all are known unknowns and so on? Do people have thoughts on that? I'd love to hear people's ideas on what are the implications for our war.
Yeah, it's a good question. I just want to point out lexicon to our neighbors to the north of there. The U.S. did have several hundred attacks on targets in Syria in the last couple of days, which I think did help usher the Russians to the door. That if that helps Ukraine or not, that's a different issue. And I do agree with you about. I think well, with what's going on with Mike Johnson, my impression, and I see both Alan and James know more about this than I do, so I will turn it over to them after this. But I sort of get the feeling that he is not in the in crowd, that he is trying to say things to ingratiate himself to Trump without really knowing what Trump is thinking. That's the impression I get. I could be wrong. But anyway, so with that, I'm going to go to James and then we'll get to Alan. Nice to see you, Alan. James, go ahead first.
Hey guys, yeah, lexicon. I think the United States did a lot for Syria by providing weapons to one of the people who had attacked parts of Syria. So, and I don't know how much Israel took of the land there, probably not as much as other areas, but clearly, without the supply of weapons from the United States, I don't think that Israel could have carried this off or many of the other things that they've done recently. So I see the superpowers' hand has a glove on, more than one, actually. And one of the gloves' names is Israel, if you like to think of it that way. It's unpleasant when you're the glove, but in a way, that's what's happening here. And so I don't think they're missing anything. I'm delighted with this news. Of course, it's a huge benefit to Ukraine. Uh, because it really is shutting down one of the sources for wealth coming out of Africa. It is a transit point. It defended the which the Mediterranean, that is, the Air Force bases, and that is going away. So this is huge for Russia's, what they do in the area. How much it affects Africa is. Well, you can debate it and we'll find out. But this is not going to be easy for them to recover directly, at least directly around that area. There just is nowhere else for Russia to go. They can go and build up their bases in Sudan, and probably will, and they'll try to recover some of their Africa power that they're getting and some of the wealth that they strip away from Africa. And I don't know that they're going to have much luck with that. So that was an answer to a couple of questions. Mike Johnson, what a he deserves to be an outsider. And if he's unwelcome, at Trump's party, I guess I'm happy for the both of them. They're still going to work together. Unfortunately, I don't have anything good to say about him, but I do think that he knows as much about what Trump is going to do as Trump knows, because I'm not sure Trump's even an insider sometimes. Anyway, but really, the reason I jumped on originally was to say, was Syria on the list of nations that Ukraine called out to? I know when they started the Kursk offensive, they had called out to other nations and said, now is a really good time for you guys to take action against Russia. And I don't recall them being on the list. I can't find the tweet I saw, but I guess it would make sense that they'd be on that list. But I remember Georgia and some other kind of more directly related countries to Russia. I did not see them, or I do not recall seeing them on that list. So I wondered if anybody knew that. And finally, I'll stop talking after this one. I really did enjoy, I think it might have been Linda's recommendation, but not just hers, about the Louise Penny, Hillary Clinton book, State of Terror. I loved it. I didn't get much done, but I got that listened to, and I highly, highly enjoyed it. And anybody who's into American politics, there's a lot to learn even from fiction in this. But it's a President Dunn. What can I say? Great title there, or a name, I should say, for a character. Anyway, that's all I really had.
That was me. That was me.
And yeah,
Thank you.
and me, Louise Penny is a great writer. I haven't read that one yet, though, James. I actually looked for it and didn't see it free anywhere, so I'm waiting until I get something else read.
Library.
No. Well, no. I was looking. I was actually you've got me onto an audiobook, so it was on. There was a wait list. I think I might have put myself on it. Anyway, we'll see. Thank you. I've only got about 1,000,000 books to read still. Anyway, Alan, welcome. So nice to see you. I'm real glad you're back sometimes. Over to you.
Hey, Robin. Hey, Adam, Lexicon, James, Will, Tracy. Great to be here on Volya Radio. I heard Lexicon talking a little bit about listening to Chuck's assessment of what was happening in Syria. You know, Chuck and I are going to be back later this week, probably tomorrow, and we'll take 6 or 7 hours probably to discuss the world situation. But you know, I don't think that what is happening in Syria uh, is a direct benefit to Ukraine. Uh, Russia will need to redeploy, especially its naval vessels. There is no other Mediterranean port other than Tartus in Syria for the Russian Mediterranean fleet, they will have to make their way all the way back to Kaliningrad or farther, and it's not going to be easy for them. The other thing I might mention is I don't know where the Russian weapons being evacuated from Syria are headed. They could well be headed to the Ukrainian frontier. They could be headed to the zero line. We don't know where they're headed. But this is a body blow to Russia's strategic position in the world. The other thing Lexicon mentioned, that this is surely the time to double down on economic sanctions on Russia. Now, the United States has been doing that. I was really dismayed to see the EU trying to engage the United States in negotiations of easing sanctions on Gazprom Bank, especially. Uh, the EU shouldn't be doing this. The EU is at one time holding publicity stunts about their support of Ukraine, and in the hidden background, continuing to deal economically with Russia, buying billions of dollars of gas from Russia, and therefore funding Putin's war machine. The EU doesn't need to do this. It simply doesn't. It needs to restrain itself and follow a moral course and maybe pay the United States more for LNG. I don't know. I'm sure Will has some thoughts about that.
Hey, Alan. I don't disagree with you. The duplicity of all the European nations that still support billions of dollars worth of revenue and could take a slight economic hit for a couple of years and crush Russia's capability to fund its war are important. I'll take slight issue so I don't think there's any direct effect on Ukraine from Russia losing in Syria and hopefully being forced out of Tartus and the Wynnyckyj Air Base permanently. But there are two things there that I think are very important. The first is morale-wise, this is going to be horrendous on Russia, especially since they are abandoning to die a whole bunch of Russian soldiers out near Palmyra. And in other locations in the country, there's no indication that the surrounded Russian troops are going to be allowed to leave, and frankly, nor should they. And the second thing is don't discount the fact that Russia can be forced to lose major strategic assets that are huge to it, and take the loss quietly and piss off back to Russia. That this is, no nuclear threats, no nothing. It's not the end of the world. Russia can take the L and piss off back home without going nuclear when they lose strategic assets. And Russia or Ukraine isn't even their strategic asset. They want it, but they don't have it. They have lost two major strategic assets that will fully weaken their capability to maintain Africa. And he's just taken the L silently.
Back to you, Alan.
Well, one thing I was going to say here, Will, I don't think the news necessarily of Russia's devastating loss in Syria will get back to the front lines in Ukraine. I think there's a very good chance that no one on the front lines, no Russian soldier will be aware of this. Already, Russian television is obviously both suppressing and propagandizing what has occurred in Syria. So I don't think it's going to have a big effect on Russian morale on the front line in Ukraine. I think what will have a greater effect on the morale of Russians fighting in Ukraine is the nearly $1 billion defense package that the Biden administration has prepared to send to Ukraine. And I think the other thing that will have the effect on Russian morale on the zero line in Ukraine is Ukraine's own ramping up of its defense industry. We're not only talking about drones here, and Ukraine continues to innovate with drones, but we are talking about these long range, heavy hitting drones that Ukraine has developed. I'm talking about the Hell missile. Uh, uh,
Peklo.
what do you think about the Hell missile? I mean, it's more accurately named than the the water chestnut or the hazelnut missile. The whatever the hell that. Uh,
Well, it looks
uh,
like a baby tomahawk to me.
It does look like a baby tomahawk, Will. That is exactly right. This again is Ukraine looking at weapons used, I think, especially by the United States. How can Ukraine knock these weapons off quickly, efficiently, get them into production, and get them killing goddamn Russians wherever they possibly can? This is Ukraine at its best.
Prosto do pekla moskali.
Yeah, and so,
Yes,
but
exactly.
Alan, think of it. You may be right, although I think you might be overassessing the Russian capability to clamp down on information distribution as well as that you think they can. That they obviously do for people who are not interested in finding out the news. But my contacts in Russia still to this day uh, get information nearly as fast as I do on the same things that I do if they're interested in seeking it out. And that information does then tend to percolate out to their contacts in or near the front lines. But the big thing is the morale boost. Don't necessarily think of the additional morale suppression on the Russian side. Think of the morale boost on the Ukrainian side, as well as the anxiety elimination and morale boost that could happen in the Ukraine's allies. Russia can take a strategic loss without going nuclear, folks, and they will in Ukraine again for sure.
Alan, back to you.
I was just going to say a couple of things trouble me, Will. Uh, One is this assessment of what President elect Trump will uh, do when he assumes office on January 20th. A lot of cheers for uh, his Ukrainian suit, the yellow tie and the blue suit, when he met Zelensky and Macron in the Elysee Palace. But Trump has also come out in the past couple of days saying that Ukraine cannot expect the same support from his administration that it uh, was promised from the Biden administration. And I do want to make that point. Promised, not yet delivered. What the Biden administration is doing right now, trying to deliver everything it has promised in the last 365 days, while President Biden has 40 days remaining in his term as president, is frankly embarrassing. Uh, this is something that the Biden administration could have done a year ago and should have done a year ago. And now, with 40 days left with their authority, they are trying to deliver everything to Ukraine that they possibly can, that Ukraine needs and has requested time and time again. Uh, it is, in my opinion, ridiculous.
And Jake Sullivan
Yeah,
But
stopped trying to rewrite history, which is an embarrassment.
you're
yeah, and
It's absolutely disgusting
you
but I
how, oh, they didn't have enough men for the 31 Abrams. Like, it
yeah, it's
doesn't make any sense
exactly.
in any level. Oh, they're not really using the Abrams. You only gave them
Well, yeah,
30
well,
of
how
them.
about
They're
you give them
saving
1,000
them.
Bradleys then, buddy?
Also,
well,
the thing is,
Adam.
as Alan was saying, that one of the things is it's not appropriate at the end of an administration when you know that your party is out, you're going to be out to suddenly start shoveling money at things. I mean, in the case of Ukraine, I'm glad they're trying to do it because Ukraine needs it, but it is unseemly. It's not. The people would have screamed bloody murder at the end of the Trump administration if he had done something similar when Biden was coming into office. So, as I said, I'm glad it's happening because it's going to Ukraine, but it really is unseemly. Back to you, Alan, and then Lexicon and Zizo. I see you too. Also, Alan, go ahead.
Absolutely. I see Lexicon and Zizo too. I'll be very short. And we don't know what Trump will do to interrupt this aid to Ukraine, which he will be able to do on January 20. He doesn't have to wait till January 21. He can do it on January 20th. Uh, and again, I think what people need to keep in mind is that Trump has already said Ukraine is not going to receive the same level of support that the Biden administration has promised, not contributed, but promised. And now the Biden administration is trying to contribute it. I do hope that this nearly $1 billion aid package filled with ammunition, HIMARS, just spare parts, all kinds of things that Ukraine needs, but not with everything that Ukraine needs, frankly. Not uh, not anywhere close to what everything Ukraine needs. The United States has yet to send F-16s. The United States has not sent Tomahawks. The United States has not sent 1,000 Bradleys, which it possibly could, will. Thank you very much. Uh,
Or a few more patriots while they're at it.
and patriots. Absolutely. In fact, the United States is probably in a better strategic position today since this precipitous conclusion of the Syrian civil war than it has ever been in order to deliver air defense to Ukraine. And I am going to leave it at that. Robin, Adam, uh, go to these other speakers. Thank you very much.
But thank you, Alan. Hope you can stick around for a while. Anyway, over to you, Lexicon.
Well, just more of the same. It's absolutely appalling. I like the graph that some people have been posting around for more than a week ago, showing the amount of money America poured into Iraq and into Afghanistan, and this tiny, almost invisible little beginning foot of a bar that shows the amount it's put into Ukraine. And then, as Alan has just said, the strategic significance of what Ukraine has made possible, the loss of Russian power in the Mediterranean, their projection into Africa. Anyway, we've all talked about it. Let's go on to others, but I am just staggered, yeah, as you guys are by the appalling low level of assistance in uh, to a country that has done so much to, the last point you made, Alan, completely transform a huge part of the American posture in Europe, in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East. But let's get Zio and people.
Okay, thanks, Lexicon. Over to you, Zizo.
Um, yeah, what I wanted to say about what happened in Syria. Of course, there is a possibility that some of the military equipment that the Russians are evacuating ends up to being used against Ukraine, which is obviously a very bad thing. But there's also some other sides to the story which can benefit Ukraine. For example, there's a lot of Russian military gear left behind, one of the things that got captured was a S-400 radar. If the United States or our allies can get their hands on that radar, this could do an awful lot of damage to the Russians. So stay tuned for that. I hope we can make some kind of deal with Hayat Sham. I know it's not the best party to deal with, but maybe it's possible. So that is
Th-
one of the first things I wanted to say. Yeah. Go on, Robin, if you want to
No,
ask
no,
something.
I'm sorry. I was jumping. I thought you had finished. I was going to say thank you. Go on. Go with the other point. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so that was one of the first things I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is, well, I don't think that Russia cares as much that their presence is gone out of Syria. um, well, they do care, and they are really mad. Like the hardcore Russian support, the hardcore Putinist supporters, they are really mad. We know it. But for Putin, I don't think it's a huge blow. I think it's more a huge blow for Iran. And why I think this is, I think that the plan of Iran and Russia was to attack Israel together in the future. As many of you know, the Russians had established military positions in the Golan Heights that were a big danger for Israel. So I think this was the plan of Russia and the Middle East, and this plan has been has this plan this plan, I don't know how to say it, but this plan is made impossible for them. So,
Kaput.
yes, indeed, kaput. So that's a very good thing. And I wanted to say something else. Oh yeah, this is what I wanted to say. Also, something I learned from engaging with the Syrians. Many of you guys know I've been busy a lot with the Syrian war, and many people didn't understand why I was so busy with it. I think most of the people understand now what was the reasons behind it. But I had a lot of dialogue with people in Syria that were against the regime, and they gave me a lot of information. Also information I could tell I told to the CIA or the Mossad, and I learned a lot from this. Also in Russia, I know there is people in Russia that don't agree with the regime, that are a victim of the Putin regime. I think it is very important for smart people like us to keep some kind of dialogue with the Russians. You never know what kind of information they have, and if you get one if you get to know a person that is against the regime, and you get to know more people, and you talk to them for a longer time, eventually they might trust you and tell you something that could benefit us. um, I do have to say here, you have to be aware that you don't give them any information that can be used against you. But I think it's very important to actually have dialogue with people that are the enemy of your enemy and that are living in the country of your enemy, because these people know the real weaknesses of the country, and this could actually help us fight the Russian regime in a really effective way if this is executed in a right way. So that's all I wanted to tell, and now I'm going to listen to you guys. Thank you for hearing me out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tizo. Yeah, one of the points you brought up is about all the material that the Russians are leaving in Syria, which is a good thing in that if they're leaving it there, they're not taking it with them anywhere else. And it would be, I hope that there is some work being done on getting some of that to the right people in Ukraine. Thanks, Alan. Go ahead.
You know, one thing I feel about uh, this great Syrian victory for the people of Syria and this tremendous Russian defeat, I don't think it weakens Putin. I think that actually what we're going to see is more evidence of just how strongly Putin is in charge of Russia, how strongly he rules this country, that there is no one in Russia, no oligarch, uh, There are no Boris Nemtsovs. There are no Navalny's left in Russia to oppose this man. He is as much in control of this terrorist state as Joseph Stalin was in control of Soviet Russia. And that's just my opinion. Others may have different opinions.
I do.
Yeah, I do have.
Yobani Moskali. um, they also have not gone through the Enlightenment and grown their nation in any sort of classical liberal manner, and therefore they need Navalny's and they need Nemtsovs to tell them how to be good. And unlike the stuff that we're discussing in book club coming up in a few minutes, they as a polity do not have the capacity to create new leaders. But yeah, I'm the 100%. I really can't wait for these folks to. I totally understand and respect what you're saying, Zizo. As a Ukrainian, I don't want to talk to them, but anyone who does, fill your boots. But I just am not waiting with bated breath for a large scale revolt. I don't know who was first.
Let's go back to Zizo for a response, and then Dr. Drago seems to be going up and down. I think he may have be having little connectivity problems. But Zizo, go ahead quickly, and then we'll go to Dr. Drago.
I would love to respond to this because there was also no Syrian Navalny. The only thing the Syrians had was a rebellion on Twitter with anonymous accounts. So this was the only thing the Syrians had. And I want to reiterate here that the Assad regime supported by Russia. Russia was complicit in many of these war crimes, chemical attacks, where Russia helped get away with the evidence and things like this. And the notorious Naya prison, where still I think it's around 80,000 prisoners are alive, and that they cannot be taken out of the prison because the gates are encrypted and there's explosives in the gates or something like this. It is really, really horrible. Yeah, Russia is also complicit in this, and if you go to a protest in Syria, if you were taking to what the military did, if they knew you were going to an anti-government protest or something, the military go to your house, they arrest you, and they bring you to Or Sitnaya prison, which you guys probably know about now, or they bring you to a military hospital, and this is actually a torture hospital with torture nurses. And we know Russia has these kind of hospitals also, because when the ISIS terrorist attack happened, these people also were tortured by nurses and things like this. There was evidence of this because some missed eyes and some were half unconscious and things like this. So these kinds of regime are really, really terrible, and I'm really sure they have enemies within the country, but they cannot speak up publicly, but they can speak to a trusted person, and this is something you have to think about. And for the Ukrainians, I totally understand. I totally understand your situation. You don't want to talk to a Russian. I totally understand this, but you have to understand there's also victims of the regime, just like Ukrainians inside of Russia, and they can help us fight the war. And one thing I wanted to say more is, yes, Russia can now actually do something humanitarian. He can pressure the Assad regime he can pressure Assad. He will not do it. He will not do it, of course. But to give the fucking codes to unleash the prisoners before they die of hunger. There's 80,000 prisoners in the Sadnaya prison right now that were all political prisoners, and this is all done with the help of Russia. And these tactics that are being used in Syria, I'm 100% sure these are being used in Russia, but we don't have the evidence yet. And yes, yes. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That certainly is something that there should be some pressure being put. I would just, Aziza, I would object. I don't. I think you're being a little uncareful with your language. Russians who are suffering because their country has decided to conduct a genocidal war against the neighbor are not just like Ukrainians who are suffering. It's just that the Russians in Russia, they have an option. They have an option to rise up. They have an option to do something. Ukrainians are victims of something that they have no part in. So I don't think you meant it that way, but I just think we have to be very careful with our language this way. Ziza, I want to go to Dr. Drago now, only because we're about to start the program, 8 o'clock program at the top of the hour. We're running out of time, but let's go to Dr. Drago.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And I want to just drop this Syrian thing because I think that in Syria, Russians just get their ass kicked out. Yeah, and I think their African enterprises will have a lot to suffer because of this, because they usually gathered and picked people from Syria to go to Africa and fight for them. So just fuck Russians wherever they are, especially in Syria. They got kicked out, booted out, and I think this will not happen if actually Hezbollah will not be probably pounded in Lebanon. So Israel has a good hand in this, yeah. And I don't want to talk more about Syria because it's irrelevant. It's just a big Russian defeat in the geopolitical sphere. I just wanted to ask you, how do you see this Zelensky-Trump meeting? And people are saying that under Trump, our world will be somehow, I don't know, unpredictable. Ukraine will have a lot to suffer. But till now, Trump, at least, at least declarative, yeah, at least what he's putting out there in the international scene, he's not as bad as we thought of, in the electoral campaign, American campaign. So, what do you think? Do you think Trump presidency for Ukraine will be a good thing? Do you think Ukraine could survive without doing like a shameful peace with Russia? Or what's your opinion about this?
Okay, that's a good question. We have three hands. Could I don't know if everyone wants to answer that or not. I'd like to deal with that question and go back to whatever else we were talking about. So, um, I've got Phil, Tracy, and Alan. Could you just tell me if first let's address this question anyway. I know Alan probably has something.
Sorry, just I don't think Trump actually will do Putin's game. I think Trump just played him to get to presidency, or even he used him. But I think Putin is more scared of Trump than other way around.
Let's
That's just my opinion.
understood. Let's go to Alan, and then we're going to go to Phil and Tracy. Go ahead, Alan.
I'll be very quick. I'm just going to say I think Trump is very unpredictable. I think that what is most important is that the messages Trump has been hearing in the past 10 days have been the same, whether from General Kelly or from Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, that if Trump does not stand up to Russia and support Ukraine fully, then the price that the United States will pay will be much, much higher. And this is an identical message that General Kelly, who is the Ukrainian peace envoy appointed by Trump, and Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, both of whom have been talking to Trump. Rutte met Trump in Mar-a-Lago. So I think this is potentially influential on Trump. regardless of what he said today, that Ukraine can expect much less support from a Trump administration than from the outgoing Biden administration. My hope is that these voices, clearly understanding that the the fight Ukraine is fighting is our fight. I hope these voices persuade Trump. Trump is is likely to say that there's no fight that's not America's fight, except the fight against China. He said this about Syria: stay out, don't get involved. It's not America's fight. But by God, I hope he understands. The fight Ukraine is fighting is America's fight.
Yeah, Putin's not scared of Trump. This is Liam Neeson, by the way. Putin is not scared of Donald Trump. Putin has so much compromising information on that old fart bag, it's not even funny. Trump would not be president if not for the support of the Russian government, and he's been working for them and with them since the 1980s. So he's just a stooge. He's half retarded.
I don't know. Let's
Psychopathic.
wait and see. Let's wait and see. Don't be so dramatically.
Draco,
Don't be so
let's
dramatically.
Well, I'm just saying, prepare for zero support, because that's what's going to happen. Also, prepare for the United States leaving NATO, because he's going to try his damnedest to do that. Prepare for that.
And by the way, the United States cannot leave NATO without the approval of the U.S. Senate. This is a new law that was passed in the United States
Do you?
last year as part of the Defense Authorization Bill. So Trump cannot say the United States is exiting
I have to
NATO.
counter you here. I have to counter you here. U.S. can no without
excuse me,
no
Draco. We
no. I have
so
to say
we
something.
no.
And he says something like,
I'm sorry. We need to keep some order here. People are shouting over each other, and no one is going to understand anything. So, let's Liam finish your point if you were interrupted. I'm sorry.
Well, I wasn't interrupted. My main point is that laws don't control Donald Trump. So if you think that this new law that they passed saying we can't leave NATO without a bunch of senators on board, he's going to do whatever he can to do whatever he can. You know, that's what he's always done. So if you expect
exactly.
anything different now, especially when the Supreme Court gave him unfettered, lawlessness, he can do whatever the fuck he wants, and he's going to try. Trust me, he's going to try.
Well, yeah, that certainly is true. That he will try. I think that there is a legal process he'd have to go through. But yeah, I wouldn't put anything past him. Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you, Robin. Sorry, all this politics is beyond me, as you well know. And, well, I think we have to just wait and see, right? Because if ifs and ands were pots and pans, we'd all be beggars and tinkers, as my old nan used to say. And, really, everything that's happening to Russia, how weak they are becoming right now, is thanks to Ukrainians and the sacrifices that they have made, paying with their blood. So if you are worried about what this orange man might do, then you can do what I'm doing, and that is push Europe to do more, push your political representatives, and you can donate to SBU Alpha and get them the tactical aid that they need, because by heck do they make some jolly good Russians in Ukraine and beyond the front lines as well. So go ahead and make a donation if you would like to, because these are the most elite and deadly warriors in Ukraine, and Russians are petrified of them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. And unlike our American special operators, these guys have to beg for what they need to do their jobs. It's not Ukraine's fault. Ukraine does not have the wherewithal that the United States does, and they do their best. But this is an area that we really can make a big difference. SBU Alpha, as Tracy was saying, is one of the most elite units in the Ukrainian military. They do an incredible job, but they need, for example, night vision scopes and a few other things that you can see if you go on, click on the link, you go over to the website that discusses all the specifics. It's a great opportunity to really really help out incredible people. We've had Gurza, their commander, on the last few weeks. Earlier on a Sunday, Tracy and I spoke with him, and it's really yeah, it really they do an incredible job, and they deserve the support. So if you have any, check under your couch cushions and see what you've got. This is a great place. It's a great place to put your money where it goes to a lot of good. And it's our friend War Doggo is doing the logistics of it. And we know him from the past. He makes the money go as far as he can. He really has done some incredible things in the past with getting tremendous amounts of high quality material for these guys. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to go over to Fella. Thanks for waiting so long, Fella.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to comment a couple, I think it was Zizo or somebody had brought up about the Russians that are suffering under their regime as well. Fuck them. They need to learn to do what the Ukrainians did in 2014, what the Georgians are doing right now. People rise up, they outnumber their police and their military, and look, those police members are putting themselves in jeopardy and their families in jeopardy. They're outnumbered 40-1, and things can happen. It looks like the Georgians are finally starting to form self-defense brigades that are going around with these protesters to handle the police appropriately. The police need to be terrified in Georgia and made to fear their people again. When people fear their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears its people, there is liberty. And I know that gets misappropriated quite a bit, but it's the truth. And if the law enforcement in Georgia is no longer serving the will of its people, it should be brought to heel, and those responsible should be made examples of that terrify people for generations not to go down that road. And that the French resistance during World War II comes to mind. Being a collaborator with the Nazis was very risky for your family and yourself. So there's a lot of precedent for this frankly, in living memory. And this is just how it has to be done. I wish there was another option, but sometimes a kinetic answer is the only answer that works. And everything else is just fucking around. Just get on with it. You're going to save lives that way.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. That's exactly right. I think you should really be following what's going on in Georgia closely, because I think we are possibly seeing another revolution of dignity, another Euro Maidan. It's very exciting, and it's wonderful to see. I hope that we can give as much help as we can, and that we, by Ukraine continuing to weaken Russia, that this will make it possible for the Georgian people to also get themselves free of the Russian hegemony that they've suffered under for so long. Phila, your hand is still up. Did you have a response?
Yeah, Elmo needs to fix Twitter on the web client. I can't put it down. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, and I didn't. Yeah, thanks. I'd forgotten about that. Okay, we'll go Tracy and then Zizo, and then we really have to start book club, folks. Back to you, Tracy.
Oh, is my hand up? I didn't realise it was up, Robin. I'm sorry, but I will just say apologies if I was a bit passionate then. But I've looked in the eyes of these people. I've spoken to SBU Alpha in Ukraine, and they've told me themselves what the situation is. And, I know how difficult it is, the situation that they are facing. Special operations really shouldn't be on the front line, but this is what they have to do with the massive FPV drones that they're facing by the Russians, every single day. So apologies for that, everybody, but it is really important. And if you do make a donation, please go ahead and leave a message as well, because that means a great deal to them. It's really touching, these messages, and it shows them that we still care. And can we start book club now, please? Is that okay?
Right before we start book club, I'd like our listeners to know about our Tracy was too passionate and you need to talk to someone hotline at 1-800 you are being silly.
Very nice. Yes, I agree. Tracy, I spoke just recently to our friend Yaroslav, who I've interviewed a few times, the Ukrainian American guy who went and is now working in intelligence in the International Legion. Um, it's this. It's there is a real terrible need for basics in a lot of these units. Yaroslav posts on Instagram every few months. Asking all of his friends, and thank God he has a lot of friends. He was very active in Razum for Ukraine before he went, but asking for friends to help him fund certain attachments for his rifle and certain advanced parts kit that as somebody said earlier, in the United States we probably have warehouses you can go in and pick a few up. Ukraine doesn't have that, and so it is much more than in most Western militaries. You can make a tremendous difference by donating to this kind of a fundraiser. It really, really does make a difference to these guys. And Tracy has, as she said, Tracy has been there. She knows these guys. I really admire you, Tracy, for, she spent a lot of time, in Kharkiv and on the front lines getting to know the people that we support. And it's a wonderful thing. So, Tracy, you could not be too passionate. And I thank you for making it real for all of us. And we're going to go to Zizo quickly, and then that's it. Then we're going to go to book club.
Yeah.
Over to you, Zizo.
Okay. I'm gonna make it real quick. First, I want to get things right. Please don't misunderstand me. The Ukrainians, I care for them the most. They are the biggest victim. But all I want to say is everywhere there's a dictatorship, there's also victims within the country of the dictatorship, because the dictatorship is often very, very brutal to their own people as well. That's all I'm going to say about that. The Ukrainians are the biggest victim. Besides that, we know that Turkey has kind of betrayed Russia by kicking Russia out of Syria with the rebels. So my question was, do people know if what the stance of Turkey is in the Georgia question? Because this can be really decisive. That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure of. I do know that Turkey triangulates a lot, so I don't know if anybody really knows the answer to that. But Adam, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not really, but what I've heard before is Turkey, I think, supports Georgian EU um, aspirations, and I don't see why they wouldn't. Because if I was Erdogan and I had billions of dollars of useless S-300s to defend my airspace that I have to go replace with Patriots, I would do everything I can. But that's not a serious answer.
Well, thank you, Adam. We can always count on you for the not serious answer. Sorry. Okay, folks, we have now reached. We are past beginning time for book club. But this is thank you everyone for who contributed. I say, oh, Alan has left us, but a lot of people. Thank you very much. This is really very interesting. And I just would like to as we switch. Oh, one other thing. I'm sorry. Before I do that, up in the nest, you'll see, of course, the fundraiser for SBU Alpha Unit, which Tracy will come on and harangue you again if you don't give money immediately. So I'm just warning you. Sorry, Tracy. And the second post in the nest is for the YouTube space that Alan Burr, who was up before, and our friend Chuck Farrer do. I think it's a weekly thing. Very in-depth dives on current topics having to do, a lot of it to do with Ukraine. You can find them on YouTube, and I put a link up to I believe it's the latest episode, Indications and Warnings. If you have the time, it's really worth a watch. They're well done, and they're very very insightful. Also, just take a look. There's some other interesting things up in the nest that you might find interesting. And with that, it is now officially book club time. We are reading Mychailo Wynnyckyj's Ukraine's Maidan, Russia's War, a Chronicle and Analysis of the Revolution of Dignity. We are in the middle of Chapter 10, A Postmodern Revolution. We're getting toward, there's one chapter left after this. We're getting toward the end of the book. It's been a very interesting deep dive into one of the more consequential great revolutions of the last couple hundred years. I think we're beginning to see that more, and I think we will in the future understand exactly how important this revolution was. We are talking now about the things that happened post Yanukovych, the reforms, the changes that were made uh, as a as a as a result of the Revolution of Dignity, which, as he points out repeatedly, started when Yanukovych left. That was the start of the revolution. That was not the end of it. So it is still, the revolution is really till this day is ongoing in some ways. Um, okay, so the post Yanukovych, the horizontal activism, as he calls it, had many constructive results. And if you remember, he was talking about things being horizontal rather than having a hierarchical structure with people on top telling people down below how to act. On the Maidan and subsequent, there was a lot more of like-minded people coming together and forming a group to get things done. And I like to think, Adam, that Volya Radio tends to be like that too. We don't have a top-down structure, but we do have people who are passionate about certain things, and they step up and do them. It's a wonderful empowering paradigm for the future, which Wynnyckyj emphasizes. Anyway, so okay, post Yanukovych, the horizontal activism had many constructive results. As I said, inclusive education was introduced for the first time. This is education for that includes people, children with disabilities, children with differences, neurological differences, or whatever. And this was a big step forward. As I'm sure many of us know, the Soviet response to children who didn't fit in with more mainstream schooling were often shunted off to orphanages and horror houses of different parts. Probably still goes on in Russia, for all I know. But this was Ukraine, as an inclusive society, generally understood that this was something they wanted to do for their children as well. The community associations were formed that pressured city administration for improvements, which must have been a shock to the pre-Maidan administrators suddenly having their constituents telling them how to do their jobs. Local apartment owners formed associations to manage apartment blocks and many other things like that. Um, but as he points out, a prerequisite for effecting change in an organization or society is leadership. Now, one of the models is the charismatic leader. We've seen that, many places that leads easily to an autocracy. Um, the Ukrainians on the Maidan and in general were much too suspicious of charismatic leaders after what they have been through to trust that. So the question is, so where did the leadership come in on the Maidan, and where does the leadership come from in Ukraine these days? One of the things we talked about last time was President Zelensky telling people in his administration not to put his picture on the wall. You put pictures of your family on the wall. That's what you're working for. And so that was, I think, coming out of this Maidan mentality. And Adam, Adam would like to read a couple of paragraphs from the book. It's a very good idea. Let's go over to you, Adam, for you to do that.
Yes, 1 second. I just turned on a light so I could see the pages of the book because
That's a good idea.
Because just at the moment, as my note was coming up, my dog started barking, so I had to run downstairs. Anyways, here we go. According to accepted social science and its reflection in management theory, a prerequisite for effecting change in an organization or society's leadership. Someone must take responsibility, and more importantly, to be effective, particularly in revolutionary times, this leader must be charismatic. But the protesters in Kiev in 2013 and 14 had no leader. Although the three leaders of the opposition parties, Klitschko, Yatsenyuk, Tyanabuk, were listened to when they rose to the Maidan stage, each of their appearances represented a battle for hearts and minds, rather than an oration to converted followers. For example, in early February 2014, when Yatsenyuk pronounced that he was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for the sake of the victory of Maidan, his phrase "Kulya v lob," bullet in the temple, became a satirical badge of ridicule. Instead of eluding respect, the image of Klitschko covered in white powder after having been sprayed by a fire extinguisher during clashes on Hrushevska Street in January were circulated in social media with the caption, "Snowman Boxer." The greatest challenge to the three leaders' authority on Maidan came on February 21st when Volodymyr Parasyuk, a previously unknown Sotnik, self-defense unit commander, who hopped onto the stage during the evening gathering, grabbed the microphone from Vitaly Klitschko, and in a highly emotional outburst, similar to Tracy's previous outburst, told the crowd that his Sotnya flatly rejected the EU brokered agreement that the three opposition leaders had just signed. That if Yanukovych was not ousted by 10 a.m. the following morning, he and his followers would storm the presidential administration buildings with firearms. Parasyuk's speech was greeted with tumultuous applause by the crowd, while the three nominal opposition leaders retreated from the stage. A year later, when Parasyuk was elected to parliament, he was made to feel the full force of Ukrainian skepticism of those who presented themselves as quote-unquote leaders in an institutionalized hierarchy. His speeches in parliament and fiery orations during rallies outside were greeted with skepticism and ridicule. So that's kind of about what I was saying earlier with Budanov and Zaluzhny. Ukrainians have a very healthy idea that, the idea is more important than the leader, like non-paternalistic politics, right? Anyone who has any flaws can be immediately cycled off the stage, and the next person who represents the same ideas can come along, because that one guy with his human flaws is just not as important. Maha.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that exactly. That is the point, and this is the point that Wynnyckyj is making here. That he calls it the charisma of ideas, or the institutionalization of charisma, meaning that the idea itself is what captivates people. The person who's speaking about it is only important insofar as they're furthering that idea. But as you're saying, the flawed individual can easily be swapped out for someone else carrying the same idea forward. Gives actually a lot more stability to a society, I think, rather than hanging everything on one charismatic leader who then when his feet turn out to be of clay, the whole everything is thrown into question. Anyway, so okay, charismatic idea. Okay, the Maidan protests were the result of Yanukovych's contempt for fundamental values that Ukrainians held dear, those associated with Europe or the rule-based government. That was this is certainly the case. I mean, we see this. That these values were the issue, not economics or anything else. He says also the Russians were also driven by ideas, the Ruski Mir, the Russian world concept. This I had a question about with him, though, with how Wynnyckyj is presenting this. It is true that the Ruski Mir is a motivating factor, but really, my feeling, and I'll ask Adam to comment on this too. My feeling is that Ruski Mir only came up because Putin wanted something to use to manipulate the situation. I don't get the feeling that this came up organically from the people. It was something that Putin became converted to, or something after he was already in power, as a way to consolidate his power and move forward that way. But I'm going to go over to Adam and see what you think about this.
Well, the entire conception of their nation is imperial greatness, right? So, and I'll say 1,000 times, Hoyla is a symptom, not a cause, and it's a sick society. Like, he became Tsar through his manipulation of all the yearning imperialists he knew were out there in Ruski Mir. Oh my God, I'm throwing my phone around. Good thing I'm not using the microphone. He read and embodied the person of Ilyan's otherworldly savior of the Rusian nation. Ideas, yes, but not good ones as well as backwards fascist values. Go ahead, Lexicon.
Yeah, he set this couple of paragraphs up at his opposition between his way of viewing my usual lecture. I won't go into it. Idealism and materialism. So he wants to say that people are motivated by ideas. So that's why he finds himself slopping into saying that, well, the Russians are motivated by ideas too. So what is this? This clash of ideas, is it? So the annexation of Crimea occurred because the Putin regime sought to boost the Russian president's popularity by fostering the idea and values of nationalism. Ruski, I mean, is he being sarcastic here? For Christ's sake, like. They want Crimea. They always have. They always will. They want it because now they got fewer places to put their ships. They want it even more. I mean, at any rate, I shall, as I say,
And it's just a
yeah,
rebranding of the great patriotic war calls that
sure.
Brezhnev started.
Yeah, and if they feel they need to trot out a so-called fresh idea, whatever, they're fine on that. But to say that these wars are animated because different people's ideas clash, well, anyway, bring on our next book that we'll do after Christmas. But yeah, I think he's kind of, well, as Robin's been saying, sometimes he gets so wound up into some of his theories there that he feels he's going to give you this theory, do or die. But this one kind of died for me. Thanks.
Yeah, lots of it. I really the first time I listened through this book, it was just sort of a lot of this psychobabble stuff, and I didn't really have time to analyze it with some really smart, educated ladies like I am now. But definitely the first half of the book is more valuable for me as an in-depth blow by blow of the Maidan itself. But yeah.
I think, Adam, I think this book has a lot to offer. In the second part too, I think I learned a lot about. I mean, I know nothing about sociology, and I learned a lot about some of the theoretical underpinnings of all this that were useful. He gets a little bit out over his skis, and this I think is as I've said before, with my cynicism about academics. I think this comes from sitting too many days in the faculty library or the faculty coffee room talking to other people who spin all of this stuff too, and it gets the theoretical part sort of took a hold of him, and he lost the connection to what actually went on the Maidan. But I think this has been a very useful book to read. And Winston Churchill said something about how if you don't have any enemies, it means you've never done anything. So we couldn't criticize him for his theorizing if he hadn't done so much of it. So I all in all, I think this has been very useful. And we are free to object to some of it, but it's I've learned a lot from it anyway.
Yeah, me too. I just have been finding the first half a little more useful than this half.
Yeah.
Myself.
No, me too. And I must admit, this chapter in particular made me very grumpy, and I'm a little grumpy about the next chapter too. But still, I didn't sit down and write the book, so there's a limit to how critical I want to be. But yes, the first part. I mean, I know, my friend Ilya, who the angel who listens to me butcher Ukrainian 4 hours a week, was in Kiev on the Maidan for most of the time. And there's nothing that can replace speaking to or reading from someone who is actually there. And this, especially as you saying, the first half of this book is a tremendous document because of that. And it's that I found that very valuable. That I as I said, I learned a lot from the theoretical part of it, but that was the part that really, I think, grabbed me. I think that's what the Ukrainian Night was, the same kind of thing. Hearing first person narratives about this really it makes it real, the way all the news reporting and everything never could. All right, anyway, so on, let's see, where are we? Oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to skip this next part. He talks about some things and says, but that didn't happen in Ukraine, so fine. You don't need to know about it either. That didn't happen in Ukraine. Okay. I mean, basically, what the good thing about it was that Ukraine did not end up, going into populism and into worrying about economics and whatever they maintained the ideals of Maidan, even in the face of some very trying economic times at home. So that is a very positive thing about the maturity of Ukrainian civil society. Tracy, yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, I think it is an important thing that you're saying, because that's where I see that where we are in the world anyway, right? That populist politics. And, I speak about my own country only because I've seen the same thing happen here as well. And many of us have said, I think we need to get back to boring politics, where people talk about, the policies that they're making and how that's going to help the civil societies. And you reminded me, I think, of something that you've said on many occasions, just about how Russia and that country over there of swamps, with whatever name it's been called in history, has destroyed, the leadership of Ukraine many times. And look how they've managed to come back. And I think it speaks to that. And then it also links me to something that Karina and I have discussed. And I think we mentioned it in one of the Culture Corner segments. So we're talking about the Ukrainian Revolution. And in those times that they were really open about giving the vote to women, paying attention to what children said, and just being, I think, really looking at things that we would all consider to be something that's in our modern society. But when you look at the time that the Ukrainian Revolution happened, and after what we were talking about with the executed Renaissance, I think it's pretty significant, linking it all back to what we're talking about now.
Yes, very much so. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Let's see. Okay, so yes, thank you, Tracy. That's a very good point. By the way, folks, you should keep an eye out for that segment that Tracy and Karina do. It's very interesting. We have it's nice. We're getting more cultural programming on Volya Radio now, which I think is very important. Not only for people, many listeners are not Ukrainian, so you're learning more about Ukrainian culture, but also to make the point and to remind people that of what it is that is at risk here, and what it is that Ukraine is fighting for, a wonderful, vibrant and old culture that needs to be preserved. And anyway, so thank you. Okay, back. So with we're talking about the ideas of the Maidan. With the Russian invasion, something interesting happens because the charismatic idea of Ukraine's revolution, which we've talked about, the dignity of the individual, the horizontal organizational aspects, but all of this becomes crystallized in patriotism. So patriotism becomes the central charismatic idea of the Maidan and of Ukraine, and patriotism itself led to the idea of anti-corruption that you didn't, Tracy. that patriotism led to the idea of anti-corruption, the application of concepts of fairness and dignity, and that collectively as a nation was an application of this charismatic idea. Corruption is a basic affront to dignity of individuals and the nation. For example, the significance of Ukraine's revolution has been under-recognized in the rest of the world. The fact that it was really a civilizational transformation, the creation and making of charismatic new ideas of dignity and patriotism, as the hierarchical structures, the horizontal structures we talked about, and the volunteer movement that followed. The volunteerism in Ukraine still is at astonishingly high levels. He talks about philosopher Sorokin, who writes about this and talks about a civilizational shift that happens in these revolutions, in the case of the modern revolutions that led to modernity, there was a paradigm that was designed to ensure the well-being of each sovereign individual. In the case of the revolution of dignity and the postmodern revolutions, some of this is being replaced by a new form idea, which is this. I think he calls it personalism, the idea of the sovereignty of the individual, but in society and in the person's place in society, rather than just as lone individuals. And we've talked about that in the past a bit. Um, the next section is institutionalizing novelty, but I want to go back to you for a minute, Adam, in case you had anything you wanted to add before we go into the next section.
No, I just saw that I'm getting a new T-shirt. I'm very excited.
Thank you for sharing. Does it say "Make Russia Small Again"?
No, never mind. It's yeah. I found out that I'm getting a Volya T-shirt.
Oh yes, we are. Yeah, we have. Okay, inside baseball, us co-hosts are getting Volya Radio T-shirts. So we have an anonymous donor who decided that we should get them, which is really great, especially since I threw out my very nice space that shall not be named T-shirts. So I'm down a few T-shirts. Yeah, that's very great. Anyway, our friend.
You didn't burn them?
It was tempting, but in New York City, you start a fire, I probably would get the fire department and a ticket. If I was out in the country, I probably would have.
Yeah, I got a big yard.
Oh dear, Oh, and all I have to make up new business cards too, but never mind about my problems. Anyway, institutionalizing novelty. Novelty. This is a word apparently that comes from Hannah Arendt that I have a little trouble with. But basically, I think by novelty he means good new ideas, which she could have said. Okay, so the Maidan, as we mentioned, is an example of a shift from modern to postmodern. The ideas of the Maidan have global significance relative to the broader themes of civilizational transformation. And this is part of the frustration I think we all have with how people don't pay attention to Ukraine, because there's a lot going on in Ukraine that the rest of the world should be learning from, but you have to pay attention before you can learn anything. And it's brutally difficult to get people to to pay attention. Anyway, okay, so now he goes on to talk a little bit about this revolution and in relation to other revolutions. Idealism, as he says, is common to early stages of all revolutions. Many begin with modest goals. For example, the French and American revolutions, it was reforms in the direction of a constitutional monarchy they were looking for originally, not totally overthrowing the monarchy. The confrontation with the resistant regime caused radicalization. And in the United States, this led to the institutionalization of individual liberty as a basic right. The sovereign individual became a basic component of modern Western political systems, and it started, from the United States, and I would say before that too, from things that had gone on in Britain. The oh gosh, why am I blanking out on what was that first demands the barons made on the king?
Magna
That's
Carta.
it. Thank you. God, my brain is. Learning Ukrainian. Not only am I not learning Ukrainian, but it's chasing everything out of my head. Otherwise, yes, the Magna Carta and well, the constitutional monarchy that was to some extent being worked on in Britain even before the American Revolution. So just to give, he doesn't mention them, and I thought that was a little. And the Arbroath. Whatever it's called in Scotland. These are ideas that were percolating. They became goals, Western goals, generally after the French and American revolutions. Anyway, so the sovereign individual became the basic component. In Ukraine, in the Ukrainian revolution, dignity and the underlying concept of personalism, as we talked about before, became the governing value, the idea of the person in society. And as a result of some of that, a major issue was how to structure the judiciary, which was famously corrupt in Ukraine under Yanukovych in the early days of the state, to answer a simple question, which was not who will rule and how in courts of justice, but rather who will judge and according to what standard. So the difference that we see in these revolutions is the revolutions of modernity established accountable governance, but in Ukraine's revolution, really, The question was, and this is in relation to the courts too, who will be the legitimate arbiter of conflict and in a more horizontally organized polity? So that's uncharted territory, really. In some ways, this is something the rest of the Western world should and hopefully will learn from Ukraine is how to organize society and to organize government to act on the basic demands of the revolution of dignity and the dignity of the individual and justice writ large. Um, so the next task in Ukraine and elsewhere is. Oh, I'm sorry, Lexicon. You have your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. He and I, as you probably know, and Adam knows, have a bit of disagreement about this. I feel like Wynnyckyj didn't already talk about stuff like he probably maybe he hadn't done history of thought, um, development of our system of justice, the evolution of its adversarial, yes, got plenty of faults, but the rights of the accused, the right to, the assumption, the presumption of innocence, the rules of evidence, and so on, because he doesn't, he treats as some novelty, as you say, ideas that in fact, it's not that they didn't exist. The problem is that all these post-Soviet societies are grappling. And by the way, he tells us that in the next chapter that the one area that made so little progress and had made virtually none by the time he's writing and has is justice and the reform of the justice system, even though it was number one on on the list of the NGO's list of necessary reforms group. Um, the all the Soviet and post-Soviet societies are coming out with this adversarial position of the human being and the state, and all the crimes were crimes against this great proletarian state, and you had to attempt to defend yourself with no real help out of lawyers, because what were they, are they against the state? Who's going to go to bat for this person who is presumed to have thieved from the state or done something to upset the rights of the proletariat and the workers? I mean, there's this whole convoluted, screwed up notion of justice that makes presumption of innocence virtually impossible, rules of evidence just non-existent, let alone respected. So reading out rights and comprehending tampering with evidence and chain of the inviolability of the necessity to preserve the chain of evidence, these sorts of ideas, it sounds to me like it wasn't something he'd encountered a lot in his previous thinking, so he sort of thinks they're new inventions when he encounters them in Ukraine, starting with Maidan. And I think that he's a little bit he's a little bit off in that area of justice. I think that he's good on understanding this notion of dignity, but dignity is, and last week I was talking about it too, a core value in a human rights based notion. So these are core values of the, say, Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the sort of structures that were built around them. So when we study Magna Carta, and I think if you had good teachers, maybe they told you that big deal. It was just the barons that were getting some rights vis-a-vis the monarch, but they told us that it was a step along the road towards viewing all persons as having rights, to need access to these rights that just the barons got at first. And it was the beginnings of an eating away at the um, absolute power of the monarch. So, um, I don't know, he wasn't there that day in high school or something, but, yeah, I think that's why I think that, in these areas of human rights and, just judicial reform, he's kind of not entirely sure why that was so hard to change. Anyway, just to me, and the years I worked, like, in Moldova and Ukraine and bit Russia and, then other transitional economies, societies, you just encountered this, you just learned on this in the setting that these concepts of justice between a Soviet type system and this European system that Ukrainians are trying to go towards are really fundamentally philosophically different.
Yeah,
So they're
thank
hard
you,
to reform.
Lexicon. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Lexicon need something else?
No, I just said so they're hard to reform. You got
Oh,
to have a whole new concepts.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And I think, I think this is part of my frustration with this book. I think he would have done much better to co-author this with a historian, because I think you're right. I think that he just is not. Maybe he hasn't certainly studied English history or American history back far enough. There are things that he missed in terms of what has gone on in the past before Maidan, which does not make his observation about Maidan any less valid. But he doesn't always place them in the right historical perspective. So I agree with you. Okay. So anyway, so the next task, and this is a big one, and try to do this in the middle of a genocidal war against yourself, is the institutionalization of the idealism of the revolution of dignity, i.e., how do you make the state institutions reflect these ideals that the country has committed itself to? This is a tough question. During peacetime, I think it would be hard enough. But anyway, so the questions, he has a list of questions that need to be answered. How can a large community be managed horizontally? And part of the answer is, as he says, decentralization, which he says, already been achieved. I'm not sure I would say that, but it certainly has been. It has been worked on. The question is whether a large and diverse state can be governed long term with a fluid hierarchy, and that is a question. Ukraine has done a lot in the last few years, and I think also subsequent to when this book was written. The Hromadas were a new subdivision in each oblast of smaller groups of towns that work together as a unit, and has the locus of power has moved more toward the individual cities and towns or whatever, rather than all being held by the central government. So this has been as opposed to what Yanukovych was trying to do, which was further decentralized, because of course it's harder to get all that money from the graft and corruption flowing up to you unless you highly centralized. So this is another double. It has a double effect here. The decentralization also makes local areas better able to govern themselves and to respond to citizens, but it also makes corruption a lot harder to affect if it's not flowing upward like that. Second one was how to institutionalize the principles of fairness and dignity locally and nationally and in the economy. The horizontal leadership needs new management structures, and how can organizations shift from the modern to postmodern paradigm? We'll have to keep on watching. It's some of the decentralization has resulted in that. Some of what we see going on in the military is an example of this too. And in speaking to Gorza earlier today, the commander of the SBU unit we're working with, we were talking a little bit about how much decision making can happen in the local units and in smaller groups, rather than going everything coming down from on high. This is one of the great advantages the Ukrainian military has over the Russian military, that commanders on the ground are much more empowered to make decisions. And if something doesn't go well, they're not scapegoated as in the Russian military. This has been a tremendous force multiplier for the Ukrainian armed forces. Um, the third issue was how can fairness, spravedливость, become institutionalized in the justice system? How to judge fairness, especially in light of skepticism of a society toward formal legal institutions, and how to establish a society of natural justice. Boy, is that a big question. I don't have an answer for that. These are questions that grew directly out of the Maidan and our wonderful aspirational goals. And it's going to be. I'm very excited to see how Ukraine progresses in the next few years. Anyway, So okay, now to get back down to brass tacks here, since Ukraine is not in a position to throw everything out and start over again, which of course would be the easiest way to accomplish all this. You just dump everything and put in a new organization in place, which you can't do in a functioning country. And so the issue really is, how do you deal with the legacy of suboptimal institutions? There are still, the Soviet holdover, Soviet mentality holdovers. There's structures that really are contrary to the ideals that uh, Ukraine is trying to implement now, and this will continue to be an issue for a while, I'm sure. Um, there is a conflict, of course, because of this, between the top down old style, top down institution creation with bottom up established informal practices. Um, and in this case, the bottom up informal practices may actually hew closer to the ideals than the structure in place. Um, and also the question of exactly how fast this can all happen. Does it happen immediately, or must, as he says, revolutionary steam cool first? I think some of these questions are really not anything that needs to be answered now, because uh, of necessity, with so much of attention having to be focused on security and on the military. Some of the stuff, unfortunately, has been put on a back burner because that you can't do everything at once. I think it is a great credit to Ukraine that they have managed to make so many reforms in the midst of all this. I don't know many countries that could have done so much in terms of economic reform, in terms of judicial reform, at the same time as really fighting a war for their continued existence. Anyway, and as he says, it will not be quick. The future will be messy and hybrid. To which Adam said,
Okay, Captain Obvious.
exactly. Okay, now that's the end of chapter 10. Now we're moving on to the last chapter of what the future could be. Chapter.
Can I just quickly say
Absolutely.
to what we were talking about in that last part of institutionalizing these changes? I think I think what Professor Snyder would say about it is the key is civil engagement, action, and vigilance. And what the Ukrainians are showing us, and we still don't know if they'll be successful with all of these institutionalizing of Maidan um, um, ideals, but I think they have a better chance than any of our countries would, because of what they've gone through and the fact that people I know in Ukraine have drone part factories with battery backup on their kitchen tables. Uh, just shows that I think there will be a lot. Hopefully, they might take a break after when the war's won, but I don't think those people are going to sit down and let it slide again. And that's the key, because it will be messy and hybrid, Captain Obvious, but I think they'll be engaged.
Yeah, thank you. I have very high hopes. From what we know about Ukrainian society, from the little bit I've seen firsthand, I don't think that there is any appetite to go backwards on this at all. It may not be easy, but Ukrainians are resolutely future faced. They as Plochy, what's his first name? Serhiy, right, Plochy. As he said, Ukraine is never going to have a "Make Ukraine Great Again" movement, because nobody wants to go back to the way things were. So Ukrainians are resolutely focused on making the future better. So I don't think we're going to have an issue with that. Anyway, okay, so on to our final chapter. Chapter 11, Moving Forward. Starts on page 339. I think, Adam, I think we may have different editions, because we don't know, the page numbers don't always add up. So I apologize to anybody else who these page numbers don't fit with what they have in their copy. But it's chapter 11.
My last page reference was a severe typo.
Oh,
329.
okay.
So it was 100. I don't think it's that far off. I was gonna make fun of myself earlier, but I managed not to, and you had to bring it up again.
Well,
Sorry.
I just love it when you're sorry. Anyway, all right. Okay, so what happened first of all? 2013 and 2014, there was a small-scale protest in Kyiv that became the catalyst of rapid social change both in Ukraine and beyond. It was all based on a basic miscalculation. And to quote Wynnyckyj, in the dead of night on the 30th of November 2013, in a very peripheral European capital, a thuggish Ukrainian regime attacked a peaceful student demonstration. The chain of events from this point on, there was a chain of events, but at any time, different decisions could have been made, and all of the subsequent steps might never have happened. I was at the Razum for Ukraine annual meeting yesterday. It was very interesting. They did the incredible work, Razum for Ukraine. If you don't know them, find out about them. They're the mommy and daddy of Ukrainian benevolent organizations or charity organizations in the United States. They were founded in 2014, and what they did. Their plan for next year was based on 5 principles from the Maidan. It was very interesting, and one of the things that one of the founders of Razum brought up was she had a question in her mind. She looked at this: where would she be now if the revolution of dignity had never happened? And it's a really interesting thing to think about. How, to what extent would these changes have happened? To what extent? Well, would everything that happened subsequently would have happened, would have been different? I think Russia's need to take over Ukraine would have had a different form, but certainly still would have been there. Nothing that happened in Ukraine instigated anything. It was Russia looking for excuses, so that would not have changed. But what would have changed in society? And to me, it's a very interesting thing to keep that in mind as we go through his discussion of what happened and what we can look forward to going forward. So, as I said, the chain of events was not necessarily causal, but things did lead. One thing did lead on to the other. But the Maidan did not cause the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Ukrainians were not responsible for Sauron, Putin's covert aggression against the West. And Adam, yes.
And neither are we in the West, for that matter. We sat here being like, oh, the Cold War ended. It was silly, and we should make fun of ourselves for the future is over, the end of history idea. But in the end, it was a benevolent and peaceful idea. And for them, active measures and hatred of the decadent West never stopped. And that needs to be acknowledged by more people in our society, that, we're not perfect. We screw up, but at least we're trying to, I don't know. And they're over there hating us.
Yeah.
All the time, forever. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming on Blood Podcast.
exactly, Adam. No, I mean, and the bottom line is Russia at any point could have joined us in the post-war, the peace dividend, and all they needed to do was live within their borders and act like a responsible country, and they chose not to do that. So, yeah, the fault lies 100% with Russia, not with anything that anyone else did, not with what Ukraine did, not with what the West did. Lexicon.
Well, that's for sure. Another thing, though, that we talk about is that this divergences theory that Shevel and what's her name, Popova, are going to talk about. In looking at what happened and trying to do some counterfactuals, well, what if, which they ask all the time. The thing is that we also have often said it's because Ukraine went a democratic and humanitarian and Western and European route that Russia got its knickers in a knot because and had Ukraine chosen, to stick with Yanukovych and to retain the corruption and the oligarchy and just be a sort of, another version of what had been going on, then the elites could have found ways to accommodate each other as they were doing all along. I mean, during the 30 years leading up to this, the uh, the elites were finding ways. So that very interesting. The thing that's in the nest that I guess War Doggo posted from Babel about that meeting that went on in Yalta, where Putin invites a bunch of. This is 2004, just before the Orange Revolution, I guess. Um, uh, he brings a bunch of oligarchs to play, and what's his name? Krapooch,
Kuchma. Kuchma.
Kuchma.
Yeah.
I'm mixed up with Officer Krebke. So Kuchma brings a bunch of his oligarch friends. I mean, the whole thing is utterly bizarre, but this is the way they used to do things. The meeting they have is recounted in this Babel article. This is the third thing in the nest, is the conversation, such as it is, completely unsubstantive. And you could just see oily Putin, the stuff he talks about, the way we see him today, he pretends to talk about something that pretends to be a meeting. And in fact, there's nothing substantive, but all he's really saying is, I've got you guys where I want you. Anyway, all they talk about is their various deals, mostly in extractive industries. The very idea of this kind of meeting, I know we've done things like back in some a couple decades ago, a liberal government party government in Canada took Team Canada to go to China, a bunch of businessmen, but they also had to throw in like some publishers and I don't know, maybe a few academics. You had to pretend that somebody else was there. This sort of activity. Anyway, the way that Ukraine went on, where it was considered perfectly all right for all these oligarchs to sit down with government and to decide everything and to do it behind the scenes 99% of the time. I think that it's that choice not to go on having this kind of accommodation that so we're not saying it's Ukraine's fault, but I'm saying that the paths diverge, and that is what freaked Russia out, particularly specifically Putin. And we have all the evidence to show that from that time on, for example, at least 2003, 4, Putin is already itching to do some, to mix it up in Ukraine because he doesn't like this divergent path. So, in that sense, the decisions that Ukraine made obviously have, and it's like the ex who won't go away. You decide to be independent, they can't stand it. Back to you.
Yeah, I think and if anyone wants a good visual representation of that particular article, I think you should read it and then have the some of the oligarch scenes from the first season of Servant of the People on, because I was reading that article today and I just couldn't help but visualize like the caviar dripping from the old man lips while they're talking these deals. Yeah, sorry guys for that imagery. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I finished it again, so I'm going to watch it a third time at some point here soon. But anyways, yeah, Russia does all this on their own. They've concocted a society that carries on being evil. It doesn't really require any exterior provocation. They find provocations that you allegedly have done, and that's enough. Now you're an enemy, and now they're happier because they've got more enemies, and they're noble, they're good. They're allowed to be bad, though, because God works that way for them. And Keir Giles' other older book, Russia's War Against Everybody, is as is as timely as ever. It's a really good lesson for people who have not heard the message that really Russia is still doing this stuff. It's a leftover Cold War idea that Russia's a nasty country. They're better now, and why are you saying these things about them? This is all a conspiracy theory. Russia, 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 and I get that. Literally, I get that told to me. So it is really a good book for the purpose that it's written. I have a couple more hours to go on it, but I can recommend it to everybody. And we should probably talk to him about his older book now that we've talked about his newer book. And thank you for the review of this book. I really like the notions that you're coming up about, the author's knowledge about things outside his field. And yeah, that is quite possibly the case that does that could you talk about shit you don't know. Oops, I don't mean it that badly, but you can get in trouble. And when you're writing a book, that's when people really notice. It sticks around. So yeah, so thank you guys for that. But I really enjoyed all this. And I guess I wanted to finish with, in particular, Russia is still going to do this because they've got a hole where we've got a history. They can't talk about their history because everybody knows it's a lie. It's related to what Timothy Snyder said in his lecture about the topic of Putin's horrible document, the Brotherhood of Unity of People of Ukraine and Russia, whatever. Anyway, this idea that it's Russia that just can't talk about themselves. They can't talk about. There's nothing really good to say. They want to be like the big boys, and the big boys would be like the United States, especially. And if they're on par or if they're beating them, then they're winning. And all this is really from Keir Giles' books. So I'm working from my recency of obtaining this information. So it's coming out of me, but that's a good thing, isn't it? Anyways, I'm sorry. I thought I'd be shorter, but read the book. Very good book. As good as Who Will Save Europe and less depressing.
Yeah, thank you, James. Yeah, I'm going to have to put that on. Now that you've hooked me on audiobooks, I'm listening to a wonderful book about the Winter War at the moment, but after that, this sounds like it'll be the next one on the list. What was I going to say? I've lost it. Anyway, thank you. Okay, I'm just going to go on. I had something I wanted to say, but I can't think of what it was. All right. Anyway, so okay, as we were talking about, the Maidan did not cause the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine's, oh, I know what it was. We had the holiday party at the law school where I used to work. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful place because people love going back to see everyone, even if you've been retired. It was, it's a really nice community. I was sitting with a Ukrainian friend of mine, my dear friend Oleg, who took me in hand at the early days of the invasion and explained some things to me like Ruski Mir and stuff. I mean, I was a real idiot in those days, and God bless them. Ukrainians are very patient people, I would like to mention. But we were talking to somebody.
Not this
Well,
one.
yeah, but yeah, you're a Canuck. Anyway, all right. Yeah, you're all right, Adam. Anyway, but we're sitting there, we're talking about this, and somebody says something about, we start talking about borscht because, a couple of Ukrainian lovers and a Ukrainian in the same room. Of course, you're going to talk about borscht. So, one of my colleagues who knows a lot of languages, he was saying, "Oh yeah, that's and the end of the word it's ch, right, the last letter. There's no t in borscht." I said, "Yeah, that's right. It's in Ukrainian." He goes, "Yeah, yo, that's Russian." He said. I said, "What if I said it's a Ukrainian dish?" And he looks at me dumbfounded. He says, "What? It's not Russian?" And Oleg says, "Yeah, they stole that from us too." And it's exactly right. I mean, the stupidest little things. I mean, they have to claim, and obviously Ukrainian soup is their own. They don't have their own soup. It was just so emblematic of this.
Lies, Robin. They've got chi and the foot flavored cabbage soup.
Oh, nummy. Oh my God. Anyway, yeah, let's say if I were to had to choose between Ukrainian and Russian culture, it's not a choice. Anyway, all right. On that rather silly note. Okay. Anyway, so okay, but the what in this chain of events, it is true that the Russian aggression, the Russian aggression probably sparked a political mobilization and a patriotic solidarity in Ukraine that would have been unlikely to have reached the level that it reached. And the contrast of the Soviet kleptocracy versus the EU rule of law would not have been stark to these young urban Ukrainians that he talks about as being on the forefront of the revolution. Revolutionary changes are rarely born during periods of relative social stability, he says. And I think this is all true. I mean, I don't necessarily think that Ukraine would not have made some of these changes anyway, but it did certainly. And Snyder talks about this too during the days in the 20s and 30s. It did cause changes to happen more quickly. And Adam has a little rant here. Go on.
Sorry, I was warming up my voice. Me, ba-doo, ba-dee, ba-dee, ba-da. That was a reference from we watched the beginning of Servant of the People with my dad yesterday, and it was quite enjoyable. We watched 8 episodes. Well, I was like diddling around the house, and he was hanging out. He had a lot to say.
Binge watching is such a
Anyways,
wonderful thing. I don't know how I managed my whole childhood and young adulthood without being able to binge watch things. We had to wait a week for the next episode of anything. Anyway, go on.
so Ukraine, not real nation, attacks Ukraine and helps solidify its national character. NATO expansion forced me to invade Ukraine. Invades Ukraine and causes Sweden and Finland to join NATO. I remain a master strategist.
Yes, and that last is a quote from the wonderful Darth Putin. If you don't know Darth Putin on Twitter, find him immediately. I actually have from him too. He has this cute little book called How to Tanky, the Anti-Imperialist Guide to the Modern World by Darth Putin KGB. It's wonderful. I should send it to one of you guys. I read it already. It just sits here, but it's yeah. Anyway, yes, he does remain a master strategist. I'd love to know the master strategy of how he won in Syria too, but I digress. Anyway, all right. The next section is the Russian problem on page 340, and as I mentioned here, one of the things I like about this section is he makes it very clear exactly where the problem lies, which is not in Ukraine. The Russian invasion and annexation of sovereign territory of another state was a shock to post-war order. I would say perhaps ought to have been a shock. I don't think that the world, the rules-based, law-based world was shocked enough. They should have been much more shocked, and the shock should have involved some kind of military response. But that's just me. European institutions, EU, NATO, OSCE, were undermined by a state actor with nuclear weapons who'd been a part of the foundation of the international system. And this is really egregious. And part of the issue too, it's Russia has been a bad actor for so long that people sort of shrug their shoulders when they pull something else, and that's not how it should be. We should not be less shocked because that's just the way Russia is. Russia does things that are not acceptable, and they really should be called on the carpet for every single one of them. They've gotten away with way too much. It was a violation of basic agreements and institutions. And as he points out, part of what happened is the Maidan received really very little media coverage. The invasion of Crimea, which was a direct violation of Article 4 of the UN Charter and the Budapest Memorandum, did engender some more coverage, but still not as much as it should have been. Andreas Umland, who I've lost, I didn't indicate where he was from. He's a wonk of some sort anyway. But he pointed out that the invasion effectively voided the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this is a big deal because, which is really part of the foundation of the global security system. Once a Security Council member enlarged territory at the expense of a neighbor, then the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty turns into a vehicle for official nuclear powers to advance their own agendas, which of course makes it completely useless and nothing anyone would sign on to. We've talked about this before. If anything that other nations under potential threat should learn from Russia's attack on Ukraine is that they better damn well have nuclear weapons when an aggressor comes calling. That's not the message that the Western nations, the post-war order, that was not the direction we wanted to be heading in. But by not acting decisively when Russia violated all of these norms, this is the place we've gotten to. This is not Ukraine's fault either, and this is not totally Russia's fault. I would say that we have had, in the so-called free or the Western countries, we have had the option at every moment to push back forcefully against Russia, and we've chosen not to do it. And that in when history is written in the future, that we're not going to come out smelling like roses. Anyway, okay. So, so what happened after the invasion to Crimea and some concerns was there was a closer scrutiny of Russia's role in international affairs, and this is what you were talking about, Adam. Until that point, people had really believed the post-war dividend. Russians have basically become just like us. Kumbaya, everybody, peace and love and everything. Once they had violated the UN Charter and the Budapest Memorandum and willfully violated all concepts of national sovereignty and sacredness of borders or whatever, it was clear to at least the thinking part of the world that Russia, was not just like us. Yeah, he calls it, and he says the military escapade in Syria made the mistake clear to Western political elites. I love that word, military escapade. This escapade has not ended well, has it, Adam?
Oh no, and yeah, that's so. That Rostov on Don. I feel like they're getting the real estate prices in Rostov are going up.
Yes. Oh boy, it serves them right. They're all these deposed autocrats and war criminals. They're going to have to live in Russia. I mean, it's probably not enough of a punishment, but still, it's something. I'm in a permanent state of shock when I found out that Leszek Kaganovich, who was one of the architects of the Holodomor, died several months before the fall of the Soviet Union. He lived all his life after being responsible for the murder of millions of Ukrainians. He lived to a ripe old age in Moscow. This just the fact that Russia ends up being the port of call for all of these genocidal dictators the world over tells us something about their value system. Anyway, okay, rant over for the moment, but it'll come back. So the military escapade in Syria and Ukraine, and we're seeing in Georgia now, are all opportunities to exert power against the decadent West, which is all the more reason why the West needs to push back. The tepid response to the invasion in Georgia in 2008, the deep concern, in quotes, over the invasion of Ukraine in 2014, it's all of this, made a more dangerous world. In Syria, it was no longer possible for Western policymakers to frame the Russian aggression as a regional power, as regional power flexing muscles in the post-Soviet space, which they tried to say about Ukraine. Ukraine was in the Russian sphere of influence, whatever the hell that means. I mean, it was a sovereign country, but this was part of the excuse that people made for not doing anything. When the Russians invaded Syria, Syria is not part of any kind of Slavic brotherhood or sphere of influence of the former Soviet Union. So he posits, and this is possible, that that the likely Russian goal of all this was to draw the United States to negotiate with Russia as equals. So it was a policy bluff as a gambit to hide growing Russian weakness and economic downturns. This is very possible. We see even now with the sanctions and everything, one of the things that the Russians continue pushing back against, they continue trying to get their leaders, Putin and Lavrov, whatever, admitted to forums of the normal nations of the world. They try to call Security Council sessions to get up and bloviate, but it's to establish them as equals to nations that they don't they shouldn't be allowed to hold water for anyway. So this was a misunderstanding by the West that for Russia, the projection of military and political power was paramount. The issue, and I'm not sure I buy this totally, but it is a point, is that Russia really, they don't care about the economy. It's not like in Bill Clinton's famous phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." Now, the Russians seem, and we've seen this now with the ruble tanking and the social programs being cut back, and people getting a bag of potatoes for their quote unquote loved one who died as a genocidal monster in Ukraine, and the Russians accept all of this. That economic issues are not the concerns that drive things in Russia. It was this business of showing that their superiority over the rest of the world, and for this reason, he says, the sanctions proved to be ineffective in those days. Adam?
That's a bingo. I totally agree with that. I mean, I think it's obvious every choice that the Huila thing has made, especially since 2022, has cost their economy greatly, including sending almost 1 million military-aged working men to their death.
Yeah, exactly. And lost the thought again. I see. I had tea instead of coffee before we came on tonight. That was a mistake. Yeah. No. Anyway, but yes, that is very true. Okay. So with the West, as part of our continuing mishandling of this whole thing, has preferred to placate the Kremlin rather than contemplate going to war with them, ignoring outrageous behavior on the international scene. Okay, should I mention this, Adam? Your comment here. I well, I'm going to anyway. No, I noticed right about now when I was doing these notes, I realized that uh, in contradistinction to most of the books we've read, for some reason, this book, which actually is from a German publisher, uses American spelling conventions, not British or Canadian. We use these up to date American.
Such behavior will not be tolerated by the
Yes,
colonials. It's outrageous.
yes, exactly. King Charles is going to be with an invading force any day to teach us. Anyway, anyway,
This is how bad I am at spelling, is that I thought it was, and that maybe I was like, is she saying that there should be an E at the end of outrageous? But it's behavior, right?
precisely.
I had to like go and like misspell the words a couple times and see what the suggestions were.
Well, it's the insidious American influence in Canada that has made you less sensitive to these differences in spelling. And it's sour cream, CREAM, by the way. Anyway, okay. So we combine the lack of interest on the West and really confronting the Kremlin, and then making excuses left and right rather than calling them on things, with the fact that the Russians constantly use plausible deniability and outright lying about involvement, and we saw that with the MH17, was that it? The civilian flight that they shot down over the Donbass? That they had 17 different theories, mutually exclusive theories that they trotted out within a few days after that happened, and we're just not equipped in the West to deal with totally blatant lying. So between that and plausible deniability, no, well, we don't know what happened. It's the guy had a Russian flag tattooed on his forehead, but he wasn't really one of us. So this allowed people who really didn't want to have to confront Russia to find excuses not to. He quotes Peter Dickinson here, who says, above all, Nobody wants to acknowledge the dire reality that a state of war, albeit hybrid war, already exists between Russia and the entire democratic world. This is in 2018. Absolutely, and it's even more so. I'd also point out here. This is interesting, Adam. You remember that Timothy Snyder didn't like the word hybrid war, and this describes what he was talking about. He was saying a hybrid war. It means regular war plus on top of it all of the manipulation and propaganda and everything. Here, this Peter Dickinson is using. He says, albeit hybrid war, as though this is something less than actual war. So I saw. I don't think he's meaning it that way, but I saw Snyder's objection to the term. But yes, I think we still don't want to admit that we're at war with, World War III has already started. All of this business about we don't want to escalate to World War III, way too late for that. But we would rather, it's like the little kid who covers his eyes and goes, yeah, 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 or his ears and goes, yeah, 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 when he doesn't want to hear what his mother's saying. His mother's still talking. Same idea here. Russia is still Russiaing, even if we're not admitting it. And sooner or later, we're going to have to. Okay, so Ukraine, as we all know, is on the front line, figuratively and literally, of this hybrid war between the entire democratic world and Russia. This does not make Ukraine a proxy by any stretch of the imagination. Ukraine is an independent actor, but they are first in line and they are in the position to keep Russian aggression from bleeding into the rest of Europe, and for that we should be providing them with much more help. Okay, Adam, any comments before I keep on going?
Nope.
Oops. All right. Okay. So, So Sauron's war, Putin, is ideological and has to do with differing visions of the next phase of human development. He and the main philosophers, so to speak, ideologues. That's better of this ideology are Berdyaev, Solovyov, who is the father or grandfather. I'm sorry, Lexicon?
I'm just snorting here. I guess Solovyov. Is it somebody else?
It's his father or grandfather. Actually, that's what I was going to say. I mean, obviously, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. The Solovyov is that disgusting cretin, whatever, who's on Russian television all the time. He apparently is like the most popular talk show. He has I think Putin gave him his own channel, like he can go rant 24 hours a day. He's absolutely vile, and his kids live in, I think, London. I mean, it's this typical Russian. He's got the dacha, and where all the rich people have their dachas there, but the kids are still out.
Not anymore.
Well, what Solovyov?
He complains about his Italian dacha.
Oh, he lost that. Yes, those nasty Italians.
Almost weekly.
Poor baby. Yeah, exactly. Oh God, these
and it's pronounced Solovyov.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Solovyov. Yeah. Anyway, his one of his progenitors was a piece of shit. Anyway, and then Ilyin and Dugin. I mean, what a cast of characters. Anyway, and as he points out, Russian aggression is framed in frightening and highly threatening messianic terms, and it's in the interest of the West to counter or at least contain. This is something that I remember, as I said, my friend Oleg when he trotted out this little article out of from Euromaidan Press about Ruski Mir, which I had never heard of before. Yes, I mean I found it frightening and hard to believe the messianic, the overlays of this. They basically have taken the Christian messianic and Jewish too, Christian messianic concept of the perfect human, who's going to come and make everything right with the world, and they've hung it on. The latest is Putin. I mean, on a leader who frames Russia as being, the light of the world, and everyone has to bow to them, and this is, that our fate is to be subjugated to Russia. It is. The more you read about it, the more frightening it is. If anybody who is not really acquainted with this, I recommend going to Euromaidan Press and looking up Russian World. It'll come up right away. Very interesting article. And after that, The Road to Unfreedom by Timothy Snyder goes into frightening detail about this. Very well documented and absolutely correct, and horrifying. Anyway, okay. Now, for some reason, and this I would.
That's
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Robin, also being propagated through the Russian Orthodox Church via Sunday sermons, and I've heard I was reading an article about the rehabilitation of Stalin in Rusian culture, and the use, this messianic idea that the spirit comes to the Rusian leader and makes him the right man for the time at a certain time. That's how they like. So all the bad stuff that Stalinovsky did before World War II, he had a revelation and became the Messiah in the middle of World War II because he met for the first time with Russian Orthodox Church again, or I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, they're using it to justify, and so basically, it's like, if you think of it, it's like the Holy Spirit of Russian imperialism, and it leaves and enters the body of the Russian leaders once in a while when they're really needed. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's really sick. We really need. Elmo needs to put an emoji here for vomiting. I don't have one. I mean, all I have is this. That's not enough. Yeah, I mean, it's and I point out too, we're talking specifically about the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. And it's. I know there are problems with Russian Orthodox churches in the United States. I have a friend who's Ukrainian who always, growing up, she always went to a Russian Orthodox church because that was all her family went. Russians and Ukrainians may not have gotten along all that well, but there was a lot of commonality. And she says she can't go to that church anymore because it's they're spouting the Russian party line. Something in the United States, we'll never do what they did in Ukraine, and that's to our detriment, I think. It's freedom of religion is a wonderful thing, but this is not religion. This is propaganda. Ukraine had the sense to respect religion and to give, the religious groups are a great amount of freedom in Ukraine, but the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, which was Russian Orthodox, it was pretty much shut down because they were a FSB organ, just in the same way, and in the same way that the Lutheran Church in Germany became a state-sponsored church, parts of it and a lot of it, that pushed the Nazi ideology as Christianity, which Ruski Mir and Nazism have each have about as much to do with Christianity as the other. I mean, it's really it takes a great deal of suspension of disbelief to buy into any of this stuff as having anything to do with Christianity. Anyway, all right. So anyway, I found in this chapter he says some things that he seems to go back and forth between being very positive and then saying things that I don't understand at all. For example, he seemed to think that with all this going on, that the least objectionable solution was a frozen conflict in Ukraine, basically leaving Crimea and parts of the Donbass to the Russians. I don't know what the hell he's thinking here, and I don't, but I report it because this is what he said. When he goes on later, he seems to be saying the opposite, so I'm not sure what the story was. And Adam has a little rant here, which I think is wonderful, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think if we would have inserted possible at the time, I would be able to agree with it. I'm not going to go on with the rest. I just started typing with caps lock, and then I started.
Oh yeah, actually, I thought you were shouting because of the caps lock. Yeah, I see that now. Yeah, no, and with the thing that I had said too is, this is very possible. You're right, Adam. At the time, perhaps that was because he was writing when the military was still in the process of getting.
He was.
Yeah.
and he was comparing it to uh, an all-out, full-out war, which ended up happening, as we know, almost 3 years ago now.
That's a good point. A lot of this, you see the disbelief in the possibility of a hot war that many people in Ukraine had up until the invasion. I mean, remember reading stories about Bankova Street in the early morning, right after the Russians had started. The several of the first-person accounts I've read have remarked that the look on President Zelensky's face and on Yermak's face and others was not fright, was not anger, but was total disbelief. So I think we have to give our author the same leeway of not being able to conceive of this full scale invasion has happened. Yeah. Okay. So and he does. Yeah, as you're pointing, he does say that this frozen conflict. Um, uh, actually, so it was said it's unlikely to become permanent because of the commitment of the elites who support Russian exceptionalism and imperialism, which I think is something we all think of too. We can't go for this because it's not going to be the end. If Russia gets a little bit, they're going to be back for more. Lexicon.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's it. I have to admire his courage in producing this book, and he may be really frustrated that that the world changed 5 minutes after he put it out. I noticed in there that he's writing at the time of the election, and he's seen that polls are giving Zelensky. Zelensky seems to be climbing in the polls, so it's prior to even the first round. And at this time, Zelensky is the peace candidate. He thinks he can settle with Putin. He thinks Putin will be reasonable. And there were people like Alexander Motyl, it was even earlier than this, who's a prof at Rutgers, who's a big Ukraine supporter now and supports the war and everything. But he was saying maybe we should just give up on Donbass, such a wreck. The people there have already become so twisted, give it up as a bad job, which I was scandalized by. But these things were being seriously debated in Ukraine at these times. So I have to hand it to him that at the same time, from the time he introduces the war, he shows that it is absolutely, I mean, it shatters everything, well, a great deal of what Ukrainians thought they had believed, and is devastating for them. And then I guess they sort of accommodate for a while, and some say, well, let's just get rid of this thing. But anyway, yeah, I hand him I give him all any yards or any margin for because he wrote at such a time. I think that it's just astonishing at how prescient his book is overall concerning the war and the Russia problem, as he so justly subtitles this chapter. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lexicon. Yeah, agreed. One of the things that I found interesting here is, as you're saying, he was writing. This book was finished in the run up to the election where President Zelensky was elected. He doesn't mention President Zelensky at all. He's convinced that the election that will be between Timoshenko and Poroshenko. And yeah, and some of the stuff he refers to about the deficits of both candidates were the that wide open door that Zelensky walked into, but it was clear Zelensky had not made enough of a splash by the time the book was finished, or it may have been not have been popular enough among the thinking classes, the academics, to have even made it into the book, which I thought was fascinating. And yeah, as you're saying, first of all, isn't that always the way you write a book, and then the next week everything changes. And he does go out on a limb for a lot of things here, and you do have to give him credit, because once you've published, you can't take it back and change it. Unlike the way the Russians do with stuff they have posted online, they just go back and fix it if things change. You can't do that in a book that's been published anyway. So good point. Thank you. Okay, let me see. Where are we? Okay. Okay, so, and he says at this time, he said, Kyiv was prepared to foot most of the bill to defend itself against Moscow's aggression. The problem with logistics had been solved, and Ukraine was capable of withstanding further Russian advantages. All of this obviously indicates that he was not expecting a full-scale invasion, because he could not possibly have thought that if the Russians mounted a full-scale invasion, that the Ukrainian military could successfully fight them off. I assume he has not spent much time in the military and was not spending a lot of time talking to higher ups in the Ukrainian military at the time. Adam, would you like to share this with our audience?
This chapter is, for me, half prophetic and half WTF. But I mean, he's predicting things. So, like you said, we got to give him a break. I would imagine he meant at the current level of the conflict to prevent those advances. For someone who's so verbose, he could definitely go with a few more qualifying adjectives.
Yeah, that certainly is true. His editor must have, said, "Wait a minute, his book may have been like 5 times as long, so they cut some of it out." But yeah, no, that's a very good point. So this was another quote from I shouldn't beat up on the guy, but it says Russia's war in Ukraine can have no end except the destruction of Ukraine as an independent state. I mean, this is from the Russian viewpoint, obviously. And then, and to quote him, a condition that Ukrainians have demonstrated as being unacceptable. My comment is, you think? Anyway, it's Adam.
Yeah, is he trying to he's getting the word count up there when he could have just used rejected?
Yeah, exactly. So then he does point out that the other alternative, which is one that I think we'd be very happy to see, would be the disintegration of the Russian Federation, which is unlikely to be ordered or peaceful. Again, Captain Obvious. Then he did this. This is something I think about all the time, and this is interesting that he segued to this here. He said that many, and President Zelensky has referred to this specifically, many see Israel as an example of a way forward. It's a uniquely well-defended civilizational outpost in an inherently hostile environment. And he says Western governments need to realize that Ukraine matters not only as a counter to Russia's geopolitical ambitions, but as a postmodern Western civilizational outpost that shows a possibility of construction and is worthy of defense. In other words, Ukraine has really been a proving ground for a lot of the path to the future in terms of developments in civilizational construction and organization, and just for that reason deserves to be protected and defended. He talks about a conference that was organized by Timothy Snyder, thinking about Ukraine conference, and they had a few. They pointed out a few things about Ukraine that feed into this. Ukraine's desire to affiliate with the West, moral and philosophical, with West was a moral and philosophical choice. It tested the proposition that people speaking different languages can live together in a single polity. This is in sharp contrast to Sauron's tribalism. Putin insists that people who speak different languages can't and should not live together, and that sameness is preferable to difference. Insularity and exclusiveness should be an organizational principle in society. That people only who are like each other should live together. And intolerance and conflict are legitimate corollaries of cultural pride. And mixing of languages and cultures is a threat to purity. And all of this is exactly his approach to Ukraine. Ukraine is like Russia, but Ukraine has different language, which we have to destroy, we have to suppress, as they've done in Belarus, because otherwise we can't be the same. I mean, the circular reasoning is really rather frightening. And why can't we have that? Because if we were all one country, then it is important for everybody to be the same in order for things to work. This is certainly what Russia does to the minorities within the Russian Federation now. It's what they've done in Georgia. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
It's, yeah, the circular logic, the Ukrainian language doesn't exist. So therefore we have to make a law against something that doesn't exist. The Ukrainian nation doesn't exist. So therefore we have to spend 1 million lives fighting it.
Yeah, and we invented borscht. Yeah, the language thing just blows me away. And why did they? What was the issue? The excuse for invading the Donbass to protect the Russian speakers in the east from those nasty Ukrainian speakers in the west. The fascists are coming to get them. But wait, there is no such thing as Ukrainian language. So what were they speaking, and what was the problem here? But fortunately for the Russians, they consider a logic to be a foreign import that the West is trying to force onto Russian society. And it's really bizarre. I mean, Snyder talks about this. That was one of the things that just really blew me away. It's interesting too because Russians have done all right in the sciences in the past, and with an attitude like that, I don't see how that's possible. But I guess people are able to compartmentalize things.
Decadent Western logic.
That's what it is. Yes, and proud of it. Okay, so bottom line, the war in Ukraine is a battleground between two civilizational paradigms. Ukraine represents the nation future for the West, and so this is a new form of revolution, new civilizational experiment, and in because of that, it has importance for the whole world, way beyond its importance to Ukraine. Next section, War of Narratives, page 348. Okay, yes, he makes a very good point here. In 2014, 2016, and we still see some of this today, the Western media used the highly misleading and incorrect term, the Ukraine crisis. I mean, what is the Ukraine crisis? The Ukraine crisis is Russia decides to violate the sovereignty of a neighboring nation and invade against international law. How does that make that a Ukraine crisis? And the crisis really is in the rest of the world. Yeah,
And now that's been transported to the Ukraine war,
that's exactly, yes.
which is what they use now.
Well, of course, because the war is Ukraine's fault. I mean, yeah, I love the way half the time they talk about the Pope, God bless him, was talking about Ukrainians being cold in the winter or something, and never once pointed out that they're cold because of what the Russians are doing. It's like the Russians were not even there. It was all about the poor Ukrainians. It's really insidious. And don't think for a second this is not part of a thought out Russian program to don't think that people are coming up with this independently. This is part of is these talking points and these ways of framing things have been seeded all over the world by Russian operatives, and they unfortunately are better at this propaganda war than they are at the hot war with the weapons. So anyway, so this as Adam was saying too, the Ukraine crisis suggests that it was a domestic Ukrainian problem, and a few other things, and we still hear some of these, not as much anymore, but that in 2014 there was a coup d'état toppling the legitimate Yanukovych government, and we've already gone over in several of the books the discussion that does not fit the definition of a coup d'état by any stretch of the imagination.
Coup de cookies.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I wonder what Victoria Nuland put in those cookies. We have to find out. Yeah, and I mean, they were
freedom chips.
Exactly. And there was a fascist junta was elected, which I sort of like too, because they were elected. So, how can it be a junta if it was elected? I've never heard of any junta in history that was elected, but whatever. Anyway, and what's going on in the Donbass is a civil war. All of this, as he says, suggests that this crisis is going to be resolved at some point. There's an end date. But the fact of the matter is that these actions demonstrated the Kremlin did not recognize the right of Ukraine to exist as a country, as Adam was saying. There's, in Russian historiography, Sauron in the old days telling George H.W. Bush that Ukraine is not a real country. This is, yeah, and yes, exactly, Adam, go on.
Well, and he also wrote that horrific essay about it and also explained it to Tucker Carlson for 3 long, very boring hours.
Yes, indeed. Yes, the renowned historian, whatever his name is, Sauron. Uh, I mean, I keep on stopping and saying this is really unbelievable. I mean, all of this. Uh, how did the world let it get to this point? But whatever, that's no answer to that question. Um, so, and as he points out, because Russia's position is not that it wants to have resolution to its border conflict, it's the solution that Russia wants is to completely destroy Ukraine, any Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture, anything Ukrainian. So that because of this, it's as he says, Russia's position with respect to Ukraine was and is untenable and can have no possible resolution. The existential threat to Kyiv from Moscow is permanent. And this is something we haven't come to grips with, which, because of this, as long as Russia has any ability to wage this kind of a war, the rest of the world needs to step up and give Ukraine everything it needs to protect itself. And I would say that includes being able to protect itself 100% from missiles and rockets, which are probably raining down on Ukraine right now. I haven't checked in the last hour or so, but this is a constant daily thing. It's not enough to be able to shoot down some of them or even most of them. This has to be. We have to give Ukraine what it needs, one way or the other, to keep this from happening. And if that includes long range weapons, if that includes freedom uh, to cross the border in Western provided aircraft to get rid of bombers on the ground and Russian airfields. All of that stuff has to be on the table because, as Wynnyckyj says, this is not going away. This is going to continue, and we we need to come to grips with that. Um, anyway, and yeah, okay. So he said no, it can't be treated as a regional dispute, obviously. Okay, so after Maidan, the other issue that we're definitely seeing now was the battle of narratives. Active measures is a term that's come up a lot lately. The manipulation of media messages and outright falsehoods, which had roots in the Soviet period. Um, and you make a good point here too, Adam.
Yes, perfected in the digital age, which he doesn't say, but it's obvious now that that's the only kind of war they're really good at is information war.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's the one of the things about the digital age is it's easier to obfuscate. It's easier to hide where the narrative has originally come from, and unfortunately, a lot of people are not savvy enough to understand. I mean, we've all, I'm sure, spoken to people who have parroted Russian talking heads, thinking they came up with them themselves or thinking it came from a valid source when actually it came right from these Russian troll farms and their manipulation on social media, which gets, a lot of the reporters these days are young people who spend a lot of time on social media also and are infected by some of this stuff, even if they think that they're being even-handed about it. Um, so it, he talks about Peter Pomerantsev, who is a authoritative writer on this subject. This practice represents a new form of conflict, and it is a primary form of conflict at this point. This is not an ancillary thing to hot war. This is the war. Um, and the specifics, the specifics of the bullshit they're trying to propagate is that Ukraine is a failed state, the most corrupt in Europe, which thanks to The Guardian, that was a few years ago. I hope they've learned since then. It's a bastion of fascism. The government is in the control of right-wing extremists. The traditional symbols used on the Maidan that came from OUN and UPA, but were recast as symbols of present-day patriotic struggle, were linked back by these commentators to the worst of the excesses of certain people involved in earlier Ukrainian independence struggles and used to try to tarnish everything that was going on in Ukraine. And particularly not understanding that these symbols it's like Slava Ukraini that we use now. That was originally an UPA. This is Bandera I never remember what's Ukrainian. What does it stand for, Adam? UPA.
OUN. Organizacja Ukraiński Nacjonist.
Oh,
You know what I mean?
no, not
Nationalist.
Narod. Okay. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, so it was an early nationalist group. These symbols, the black and red flag, for example, the saying Slava Ukraini. These have and many other things have roots in that era, but have become completely reconnected to the modern patriotic struggle. They're not. No one is referring back to that history by using these. But for foreign reporters coming in, not understanding, it was a really great, they're hearing anyway about all these Ukrainian fascists because they're getting all this bullshit from the Russians. Look, they're using fascist symbols. I mean, even the symbol that the Azov battalion was using. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it sort of looked like a swastika, although it wasn't. It was a completely different symbol. But they even glommed to that. Oh, it looks a little bit like a swastika. They must be Nazis. This in part is made worse by the fact that so many people who want to pontificate about Ukraine know very little about the history, and it makes it even worse. But this is a Russian narrative that is being peddled. The issue in the Donbass was grossly oversimplified. The Russian view on this is that right-wing nationalists overthrew legitimately elected Yanukovych, which we've discussed. There was nothing. He was not legitimately elected, and well, he was legitimately elected, but he was ousted in a completely legal process. That the president's heartland, which was in the east, he was from the Donbass, had revolted against the new fascist government. Also not true. And that Moscow was assisting local compatriots in a struggle for linguistic rights and a desire to identify with Russian and Soviet historiography. If this had been the case, Russia would have managed to take over a lot more than what was it, 7 or 10% of the Donbass, because all those Russian-speaking Ukrainians fought against the Russian invasion. Well, not all of them, but a large number of them. It's become clear as history has gone on exactly how much of the so-called opposition in the Donbass were actually Russians or ginned up by Russia. There was a lot less support than they tried to have people believe, but a lot of people did believe it. The problem also with this Donbass narrative is that the Crimean annexation doesn't fit at all. If this was the reason, would have no reason to have taken over Crimea. There was no linguistic rights issue. There was no civil war issue in Crimea that even they could make up. So, like with a lot of Russian propaganda, if subject to scrutiny and logic, it's easy enough to dismantle. The problem is that this isn't done. One of the techniques of propaganda in general, and we see this certainly in what goes on in the United States these days, is that everything is ginned up as an emotional issue. Once people start reacting emotionally, like those, those Ukrainian Nazis were so afraid of what they're going to do. It's so horrible. They're so, whatever. You've lost the ability to think logically. You've lost the ability to examine what you're hearing and compare it to other things that you know to see whether it holds water or not. So this is, part and parcel of this whole issue. Anyway, this. Welcome to my TED Talk, except it wasn't. Anyway, over to you for a minute, Adam, and then we'll continue on.
I was just going to say, I think that this concept that symbols change over time should be more easily understood, and the fact that so many journalists got it wrong is really, really sad. I mean, look at the Union Jack. What's the the rebel flag in the States? Like I don't think every person who has a rebel flag in the States is a fan of slavery, right? Like, don't be silly. And that's what people were saying at the time, and part of this silly politics that drives us wedges between us. That's all part of their game too.
Yeah, exactly. I would even point out the swastika. There is a synagogue in Beit Alpha on the West Bank in Israel that in the mosaics it has swastikas. The swastika was a symbol that existed centuries and centuries before the Nazis co-opted it. So if we're going to talk about how, symbols and meanings, there's an obvious one too. It became a very negative symbol, but it wasn't always. Symbols can, and anybody who uses swastika now is referring back to it. It's become too powerfully linked. But yeah, it is true. They over time, symbols can have different meanings. But they were looking for a way to hang that right wing fascist label on what was going on in Ukraine on the revolution. So that was why, it fed right into it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, but again, if people, you have to stop and think once in a while, folks.
They should have interviewed some Judeo-Banderista.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's one of my favorite. I want to be. I want to be a Judo Banderist, whatever it was. Yeah, which means a Jewish Banderite. That's what some of the Jews on the Maidan, when they started up with this, Ukrainian fascist business. This is what Jews on who many who were on the Maidan demonstrating as well. Humorously started calling themselves. A great example of Ukrainian humor, I might add. It's a little bit dark, but it's very funny. Anyway, okay. So the fact was, we talked about how that many different things happened, none of which were organically linked to each other, but in retrospect, looking back on it, there was a single spiral of violence that started with the beatings and murders on the Maidan, followed by the invasion of Crimea and Russian instigation of protests in the Donbass and invasion. To quote Wynnyckyj, these events form a continuity and a persistent Russian agency, and the chain is undeniable. And that's the bottom line here. Things could have been different at any point, but in terms of things going in the worst possible way, Russia's fingerprints are all over all of it. They had a choice many, many times in this whole process of choosing to go in a better direction. They didn't. So, okay, we're gonna go on. Yeah,
we're overtime.
Oh my goodness,
We're
I completely
overtime,
lost.
buddy.
Thank you. I could just keep on going
Lost
here.
track.
I absolutely lost track. Okay, folks. Okay, this is a good place to stop anyway. We're gonna next week we're gonna hit the Minsk Accords. Next week, we will be finishing this book, I think, Adam. Adam and yes, exactly. Adam and I have to have a chat about what we do next. I am, and if anybody has any ideas, my DMs are open. I would very, very much like to do a feel good program for 1 week on Ukrainian Christmas. I've read Yaroslav Ritzak's wonderful little book called A Ukrainian Christmas. I don't think we want to do the whole thing as a book club book because it would sort of deaden the book. It's a dear little book with recipes, but I really would love to have a week at least of, and hopefully with Ukrainians and Ukrainians from Ukraine and from the diaspora coming up and sharing what they love about a Ukrainian Christmas. I only know about it from reading, and I would love to hear more. So that would be 2 weeks from today. Hopefully, I'm going to try to get this a little bit organized. And as I said, anybody who has any ideas, if you're Ukrainian or from Ukrainian friend who has a charming story that has to do with Ukrainian Christmas or Svet Mykolaya or whatever, any of the things surrounding Ukrainian Christmas, I would love to hear about it. And I plan to have 2 hours or maybe 3 of enjoying all the wonderful things about Ukrainian culture. Anyway, so that's that. Adam, I'm going to turn it back over to you for a minute. I'm going to let our back channel person know that Adam finally told me what time it was so I can close up. Over to you for a minute, Adam.
I didn't notice until 8:04, and I didn't want to interrupt too bad. Oh, James is requesting after hours, which is scandalous.
Let's bring him up for a minute.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think that'll be really fun. It'll get me in the Christmas spirit for sure. And yeah, I would just invite anyone. I wanted to say this earlier. Please go on Ming the Merciless Fellow's timeline. He's retweeted a recording of Parmesan Girl having a complete meltdown about Syria, and it's just, oh, it's delicious. Anyways, not a very
Oh,
professional way to close the
mm,
space,
uh,
but
James,
Vatnik tears are lovely.
yes, oh, absolutely. Okay, James, Sojo, I would love to call on both of you, but we are over time here, and I don't want to stress our back channel people. So if you have anything that's really pressing, oh, James dropped already. Okay, I love you, James. Okay, so we're gonna say, Adam, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for everybody with really great discussions this week, and we'll see you all next week. Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam
And
slava.
Skoro побачимos. See you soon. Good night.
Welcome to Volya Radio. Slava Ukraini. Welcome to Volya Radio. Slava Ukraini.